Chapter 15:15. The Sovereign Lord was the supreme of the sovereigns. No one dared to disobey his orders in the East Continent. The sovereign's servants cultivated for hundreds of years, and went through the life and death sovereign tribulation before they could become sovereigns. However, they were willing to become someone's servant and be branded with the spiritual mark of a servant. They gave up their pride and took pride in their master. The Moro royal family was Denda's servant in the East Continent. Few people knew about this. Even the 4 divine generals who accompanied Qin Hao in the East Continent didn't know about it. Taking Dendi as their master had always been the highest secret of the Moro royal family. Only the direct descendants of the Moro royal family and Dendi would secretly maintain a master-servant relationship under special circumstances. Now, the most talented prince of the Moro royal family, Mo Xian, who was so proud that he didn't care about the position of crown prince, actually knelt and bowed to Qin Hao. People in the East Continent would be shocked if they saw this. If Zhou Wudao saw this, he might think it was an illusion and wouldn't believe his eyes. Qin Hao's heart trembled when he heard the words, "Sovereign Lord." He hurriedly pulled Mo Xian up and the two flashed toward a cave residence on the mountainside of the Xiantian Peak. They waved their hands and set up a barrier. "Rest assured, Sovereign Lord. I followed you all the way here." No one noticed. Mo Xian's eyes were filled with fanaticism. Although he tried to suppress his excitement, it was obvious that he was very excited. "How did you recognize me?" Qin Hao asked cautiously. "I'd guessed." Mo Xian lowered his head and replied softly. The Moro royal family didn't have any pride in front of the Sovereign Lord. Phew! Qin Hao raised his head and heaved a long sigh. He thought that he had given himself away in the training ground. Thinking about it carefully, since he had asked Zhong Ans to pass the message and he had used the sunset arrow art on the Dao platform, the descendant of great Emperor Mo Luo would naturally know the method of using the sunset arrow art. With Mo Xian's intelligence, how could he not have guessed it? It's been 600 years. Have you Moro family been well? How about Mo Qianjia? Is he doing well? The aura on Mo Xian's body made Qin Hao feel extremely warm. He couldn't help but ask. "Everything is fine. The family has always believed that the Emperor is not dead and has always been looking forward to your return. It's just that, 50 years ago, Ancestor Thousand Tribulations failed to cross the unblemished tribulation and died," Mo Xian said sadly. Mo Qianjia, the son of great Emperor Mo Luo, could be considered Qin Hao's half-adopted son. Qianjia, Qin Hao felt a wave of pain in his heart as he thought back to the past. Every frown and smile of his old friend seemed to be right in front of his eyes. But now, he had already withered away. For a moment, the two people in the cave were silent. After a long time, Qin Hao said apologetically, "I let Mo Luo down. I didn't take good care of Qianjia for him." "Emperor Lord, please don't say it like that. If it wasn't for your protection, Moro family would have already disappeared from this world." At the moment of Thousand Calamity Ancestors' death, his eyes were still looking at God Burial Valley. Although he didn't say anything, we all know that he still misses you. Mo Xian said in fear and trepidation. Qin Hao waved his hand. "What protection? If I was here, how could the unblemished calamity take his life? Forget it, it's useless to say anything. I feel guilty." Everyone knew that 600 years ago, great Emperor Mo Luo stepped onto Sunset Peak and challenged Dendi. That battle shook the East Continent. It was an unprecedented battle. One lived and the other died. In the end, Dendi won and great Emperor Mo Luo fell from the peak. From then on, Moro Empire became a vassal of Daqin. But who knew that great Emperor Mo Luo was actually at the end of his lifespan? He purposely stepped onto Sunset Peak to seek Denda's sympathy and protect his Moro family? The fall of an expert of a generation and the collapse of his family's backer was undoubtedly a disaster. Moreover, at that time, Moro Empire was in turmoil. The nobles were divided and evil people were harboring evil intentions. They had long wanted to overthrow Moro Empire's authority. But because of great Emperor Mo Luo's deterrence, they didn't dare to make a move. A tiger had a tiger's might. Even if it was a dying tiger, it could still devour people when it became fierce. But once great Emperor Mo Luo died, it would be the end of the Moro family. The reality was as great Emperor Mo Luo expected. 3 days after he died on Sunset Peak, a civil war broke out in Moro Empire. Corpses piled up like mountains and it was extremely tragic. They lost a third realm emperor. Mo Qianjie alone couldn't stop the rebel army. At that time, Mo Qianjie was only a Dao-confirming emperor. His family was retreating step by step. At one point, they retreated to the imperial city and were in imminent danger. If they lost the war, the entire Moro family would be wiped out. There wouldn't be any way to survive. This kind of inhumane killing had happened in the East Continent before. It was a lesson learned in blood. History only recorded and praised the victors. No one cared about the violence used in the middle. However, as the strongest country at that time, Daqin suddenly attacked Moro Empire and pointed their swords at the rebel army. The valiant army was like a hot knife through butter, catching the rebels off guard. The 3 leaders of the rebel army, who were Second Realm emperors, were killed by Qin Hao and Zhan Wu on the spot, saving the imperial city from destruction. At that moment, the world learned that great Emperor Mo Luo and Dendi had made an agreement during the battle at Sunset Peak. The loser would be sent to their territory. Great Emperor Mo Luo was defeated and the entire Moro Empire was incorporated into Daqin. Because of this, Qin Hao had a good reason for his actions. But in reality, he had entrusted his entire family to Qin Hao and let his descendants recognize him as their master. Perhaps Moro was unwilling at that time, but he had no choice. Zhan Wu wanted to seize the opportunity to take over Moro Empire and annex Moro's territory. Who knew that under Qin Hao's orders, the entire Daqin army would retreat from Moro's territory. Only Yu Feng and Zhan Lang were left behind to guard the territory. They helped the Moro family to recover the territory and also served as a deterrent to the surrounding tribes and the great Zhou Empire. This matter made Zhan Wu unhappy. It was such a good opportunity, but great Emperor Mo Luo died and gave away a piece of fertile land. Moreover, that battle wasn't easy. There were many casualties among Daqin's soldiers. They were all elites who had followed them all the way. Obviously, Qin Hao used his trump card. Other than that, he also gave a large amount of cultivation resources to the Moro family. Even though he was unhappy, Zhan Wu couldn't influence Qin Hao's decision. It wasn't until several decades later that the Moro Empire gradually stabilized and had the ability to protect itself that Yu Feng and Zhan Lang returned to Sunset Peak. Without Emperor Mo Luo, the entire Moro family would have become ghosts in hell. We will always remember this favor. Mo Xian felt uncomfortable in his throat. His voice was a little choked. Even though he didn't witness the hardships of that generation of Moro family members. But in his bones, the thought of Dendi as the master was instilled in him since he was born. Without Qin Hao, there would be no Moro. I'm just fulfilling my promise. Senior Moro helped me comprehend the power of the peak of the 3rd level with the resolution to die. He also took action and sacrificed his life. No matter what his original intention was, it's true that he helped me clear the obstacles in my cultivation. Qin Hao thought about the past. It was like a dream. Without great Emperor Mo Luo, he probably wouldn't have been able to see the opportunity of the 4th level of Nirvana. Unfortunately, he died in the Valley of the Gods before he could fully comprehend it. He didn't manage to break through to the Nirvana realm in the end. What happened back then? We definitely don't believe the bullshit news of the 4 divine generals betraying you. Senior Zhan Lang and the others are loyal to you. It's impossible for them to betray you. Mo Xian asked. If it wasn't for Mo Qianjie stopping them, Moro family's army would have broken into Daqin and charged towards the Sunset Peak to demand the truth from Zhan Wu and Han Lingxian. But Xian also knew that with Moro family's strength, the army would be destroyed by Zhan Wu's men before they could reach the Sunset Peak. Dendi was already dead. Sunset Battle God and Han Lingxian ruled the world with their hand. Daqin was so powerful. Moro family was like an egg hitting a rock. It's not important. I don't want to be entangled with who's right and who's wrong. It's fine as long as you guys are fine. In the future, work hard and rely on yourself. Don't be controlled by Han Lingxian and Zhan Wu. Qin Hao reminded. How could it not be important? Rumor has it that you're dead and… Xian glanced at Qin Hao. With his eyesight, he could see that this was a young body that was very likely to have been possessed. This proved that Dendi had indeed died once. His body was destroyed, and he was forced to possess someone else's body. The murderer was so vicious. How could he just let it go? This hatred must be avenged. He could let go of Dendi, but Moro family would not. Xian. Qin Hao yelled and stared at the descendant of Qianjia. Forget it. Even if I return to my peak state, Zhan Lang, Yu Feng, and the others will still be here. With the support of your Moro family and Penglai Immortal Island, I won't be able to touch them. There was more than one murderer, and all of them had shocking cultivation. You can't touch them now, but it doesn't mean you can't touch them in the future. Now that you've become the disciple of Palace Lord, you can borrow the power of Palace Lord. As long as you say the word, I believe that Senior Brother Eastern Sky and Senior Brother Chong, you will step into the mortal world and kill those poisonous people. Xian's chest was burning with a fire as if it could burn everything. With Qin Hao's position in Eastern Sky's heart and his current identity as Palace Lord's disciple, he believed that the Peak Masters of the Seven Peaks would be willing to help. Even if the Peak Masters didn't do anything, just a few elders and chief could wipe out the entire East continent. In this world, who could stop Palace Lord? It was just that Palace Lord didn't want to enter the mortal world. Borrow the power of Palace Lord? Qin Hao's eyes became confused. The figures of Eastern Sky, Chong Yu, and many others appeared in his mind. Eldest Senior Brother and the others were good people. If they were alive, Qin Hao might really release Eastern Sky and Chong Yu from Palace Lord in a moment of excitement. But unfortunately, go back and don't tell anyone about me. The 3 demon generals won't allow it. The family members won't allow it, including your Imperial Father and Imperial Mother. Qin Hao removed the barrier and stepped out of the cave. Plop! A kneeling voice came from behind him. Imperial Lord, forgive Xian for not being able to obey. If you dare to say half a word, I will have nothing to do with the Moro family from now on. Get out. Qin Hao rose up. His body flickered with light as he flew to Migres Peak. Calculating the time, it was almost half a quarter of an hour. Imperial Lord. Xian's palm sank into the soil. His expression was fierce. After a long time, he gradually calmed down. With a bitter smile, he left the cave and returned to the Xiantian dojo. The Moro family had to listen to the Imperial Lord. For them, Qin Hao was the ancestor of the family. Without Dendi, there would be no Moro family today. Moreover, from the tone of the conversation just now, Xian also had some clues. The reason why Qin Hao fell was probably not as simple as 1 or 2 people. There must be a huge force behind it. Perhaps that force was enough to shake the entire Divine Wilderness continent. Although Moro was a big empire in the East continent, it was nothing in front of the entire continent. Dendi was obviously afraid of implicating them. At the Xiantian dojo, the disciples of the various peaks were still comprehending. In the vast dojo, figures were sitting on the ground. Their postures were extremely upright, and their expressions were extremely serious. At this time, Qingji Han retracted her divine sense. Her flawless face, as fair as snow, revealed a look of unfulfilled desire. Looking at the first divine soldier on the platform, she sighed. What a magical spiritual power! If I can get it, it will definitely raise my cultivation by a level and shorten the path of cultivation. Chapter 15-16. Although Lu Bingyan was one of the 3 demon generals, she was also Mo Xian's maidservant. She had accompanied him to cultivate at the Yaoguang Peak, so she naturally knew that Mo Xian had left to find Qin Hao. However, she did not know what Mo Xian and Qin Hao were talking about, nor did she have the right or courage to ask. However, if Qingji Han were to ask, how would she explain? At this moment, Qingji Han was still reminiscing. She stared at the 11th divine soldier on the Dao platform with an infatuated expression. The possessiveness in her heart grew stronger and stronger. She was determined to obtain this divine soldier. However, at the same time, she also knew that Xiao Han would not give up so easily. That divine soldier would also be of great use to Xiao Han's cultivation. It all depended on who was stronger, who would be the first to conquer the artifact's spirit and control the divine soldier's nomological Dao intent. It just so happened that the 7 Peaks Dao discussion was a chance for them to prove themselves. It was also the last chance for the 7 Peaks disciples to obtain the divine soldier. Once missed, it would be lost forever. After all, the 12 weapons on the Dao platform would be bestowed to the 7 Peaks' new first seat and second seat. Qin Hao was the only new disciple of the Migres Palace. No one would compete with him. Moreover, he had also grasped the nomological power of a certain divine soldier. The archer battle suit would definitely be Qin Hao's. The other 6 peaks were different. They had many disciples. No matter which peak it was, there would be no less than 3 or 4 personal disciples. The competition would be very intense. This was especially true for the Daozong Peak. The first seat and second seat would probably be fought to the bitter end. The Daozong Peak had the most geniuses, and all of them were capable. However, Qingji Han guessed that the first seat and second seat would most likely fall to Xiao Han and Shouwuk. As for the Yaoguang Peak, its personal disciples were Mo Xian, Chang Helou, and Su Jin. Mo Xian naturally wouldn't fight with her, but Chang Helou and Su Jin definitely wouldn't give up. Of course, the first princess of the East Continent was so talented that she didn't need others to give in to her. She would use her actions to prove herself. She would definitely have a part of the divine soldier on the stage. However, her opponent was Xiao Han. She had to conquer the divine soldier's artifact spirit first. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to pick a weapon that suited him. Where's Mo Xian? Only then did Qingji Han realize that Prince Moro was actually not here. Although the members of the Moro clan had always thought highly of themselves and were arrogant, they attached great importance to the cultivation of martial arts. After all, they had experienced the calamity of their country's destruction. That lesson was engraved in their bones, and they had an extreme desire for martial arts. Qingji Han could not figure out why Mo Xian was not here. Why was he willing to give up studying the divine soldier? His Highness, he. Lu Bingyan averted her eyes. She was nervous and stammered. I'm here. A voice came from behind. They saw the noble Prince Moro, Mo Xian, pass through the crowd in the training hall and come to Qingji Han. Qingji Han raised her eyebrows slightly. She felt a sense of coldness coming from Mo Xian. She didn't know if she sensed it wrong, but the coldness disappeared in a flash. There's still half a month before the 7 Peaks Cultivation Symposium. Don't you want the divine soldier anymore? Of course. The descendant of the Moro clan will never embarrass the Daqin. Mo Xian sat down on the ground. He looked at Qingji Han and said, I went to look for Qin Hao. You went to look for Qin Hao? Qingji Han was puzzled. During the trial of the illusory palace, little Zhong had a conflict with him. If he hadn't magnanimously let me go, little Zhong might not have come back alive. I had to express my feelings, but that's that. In Feng City, he humiliated me. I can't just let it go. After Mo Xian finished speaking, he closed his eyes. A peak Ren Huang will shrouded the platform. This willpower was very strong. It contained rules and will. Above his body, there was a faint layer of platinum light. Obviously, he was half a step into the imperial realm. Qingji Han turned her head and didn't say anything. Although the people of the Moro clan were arrogant, they knew how to distinguish between kindness and hatred. They would repay kindness and revenge. This distinctive character was quite appreciated by Uncle Zhan Wu and Qingji Han. It was probably a mark left by the war that destroyed the Daqin dynasty a long time ago. Next, Qingji Han focused her mind and began to comprehend the divine soldier again. She didn't care about the feud between Mo Xian and Qin Hao. She only had one goal, and that was to defeat Xiao Han. On the side, Lu Bingyan glanced at Mo Xian. Did he go to Qin Hao just to thank him for not killing Zhong An's? This was in line with His Highness's personality. However, Lu Bingyan felt that something was strange. It wasn't the incident that was strange, but Mo Xian was very strange. It seemed that after returning, His Highness's temperament was somewhat different from usual. In the huge platform, the disciples of the Seven Peaks were focused on comprehending. Many of the older disciples also joined in the cultivation. Even though they didn't have the opportunity to seize the divine soldier, it didn't prevent them from using the will of the divine soldier to deepen their understanding of rules. After all, most of the older disciples hadn't stepped into the great emperor realm. There were only a few strong first seats like Eastern Sky, Izue, and Tian Quebec. For example, among the new disciples, there were only a dozen people like Qin Hao who were monstrously talented. In the Xiantian Dao Plaza, there was a huge cultivation trend. For a time, the disciples of the Seven Peaks were so engrossed in cultivation that they forgot to eat and sleep. In another half a month, the older disciples would leave this unforgettable place and return to the secular world. From then on, they would no longer hear the teachings of the Seven Peak Venerables. Everyone cherished the little time they had left. Mo Xian, Xiao Han, and Shou Wuk didn't leave. Ning Tianxing didn't either. However, Ning Tianxing was a little puzzled. Why was Qin Hao's silver armor during the battle between Golden Light City and Feng City so similar to the Sagittarius constellation on the platform? Moreover, the aura of the silver armor was very compatible with the 12 pieces of the divine soldier. It was as if they came from the same source and were made by the same person. Of course, Ning Tianxing didn't believe that Qin Hao's silver armor was also made by the Lord of the Xiantian Peak. After all, that was too absurd. After all, Qin Hao had come to the divine palace with them. Could it be that he didn't come here just to improve his cultivation, but to find an acquaintance in the divine palace? Ning Tianxing pondered as he comprehended. Qin Hao was giving him more and more pressure. He was no longer the nameless rogue cultivator who was oppressed by the top forces of the southern region at the Golden Light City auction. At that time, Ning Tianxing didn't care about Qin Hao at all. Even when Qin Hao revealed his identity as the West Liang Pavilion Master and had the support of Duan Zhanfei and Xiao Wudi, Ning Tianxing didn't take him too seriously. Maybe Xiao Yi had some ability, but he was only an emperor in the northern border. There were many more powerhouses in the southern region than in the northern border. The Ning family alone had 5 bloodlines, and any one of them was better than any empire in the northern border. Unfortunately, 3 bloodlines were extinct, and only 2 were left. Even so, it was far from what Xiao Yi could compete with. After all, the Ning family had 2 old ancestors and 2 great emperors. In addition, there were more than 10 great emperors below 9 stars, and there were even emperor-level servants. What could Xiao Yi have? There was only the Battle King Duan Zhanfei, and that Battle King's cultivation was nothing. In any case, the previous Qin Hao couldn't be compared to Ning Tianxing. The gap was too big. But it was different now. Ning Tianxing actually felt pressure from Qin Hao. This person was extremely talented, and had the support of the master of the divine palace. He was a great threat. This made Ning Tianxing reconsider where he should place Qin Hao. If the silver battle armor in the other party's hands really came from the Xiantian Peak bloodline, then Qin Hao was very likely to be the descendant of the disciples and grand disciples that the supreme Xiantian Peak once taught in the outside world. This relationship was very important. Although he has the support of Migres Peak and Xiantian Peak, with the character of the people of the Divine Palace, they should disdain the disputes of the secular world and won't intervene in the affairs of the four major territories. Even if they won't intervene, they might leave some powerful treasures for Qin Hao. Ning Tianxing nodded. The future was still unpredictable. For now, he had to seize a divine soldier first. Moreover, it seemed that Qin Hao had once given an identical silver battle armor, and that battle armor was still in Ning Chaofan's hands. Thinking of this, Ning Tianxing smiled. Perhaps he should talk to Ning Chaofan. In the Xiantian Peak Training Hall, the people of the Seven Peaks were all desperately cultivating. The older disciples were planning to leave the Divine Palace, and the new disciples were preparing to compete for the Divine Soldier. As for Qin Hao, after bidding farewell to Mo Xian, he left the cave residence and returned directly to Migres' palace. He was the only disciple of Migres and the next chief disciple. No one would compete with Qin Hao. Even if he didn't conquer the weapon spirit, he would still be able to get a weapon after the Seven Peaks Dao discussion. Moreover, he had already obtained the approval of the archer battle armor through his actions before this. Therefore, there was no need for him to stay in the training hall. Upon returning to the main peak, Qin Hao discovered that the 6 peak sovereigns were all present, as well as many elders. They were probably discussing how to hold the Dao discussion. The Dao discussion was too troublesome, so Qin Hao didn't enter. Instead, he returned to his loft. If I'm not wrong, the Divine Palace is an illusion. Like the illusory palace, it's maintained by an extremely powerful energy. It's probably an array. I wonder who's controlling it from behind the scenes. Lying on the bed, Qin Hao held his head in his hands, finding it difficult to calm his thoughts. The Divine Palace exuded a strange atmosphere. The more he thought about it, the more he felt a chill run down his spine. For the first time, Qin Hao felt that his fate was being toyed with. It wasn't just him. The strongest and most outstanding geniuses of the 4 regions of the Divine Wilderness continent were all gathered here and were being wantonly manipulated. If the Divine Palace I see now is an illusion, then the real Divine Palace was probably destroyed a long time ago. As for Master, Martial Uncles, and all the senior brothers of the 7 Peaks, they're either images left behind when the Divine Palace existed, or they're remnant souls that have been manipulated. Qin Hao analyzed. Even though he was Dendi, he couldn't help but tremble in fear. What kind of terrifying power could flatten the Divine Palace and kill so many Nirvana heavenly emperors? Qin Hao's cultivation was limited, so he couldn't determine whether the peak sovereigns and eastern sky were remnant souls left behind when the Divine Palace was destroyed, or if someone had used the mirror image technique. After all, it was too realistic. If they were all remnant souls, things might not be so bad. After all, their remnant souls were damaged and might have forgotten the disaster. According to their consciousness when they were alive, they wouldn't think that they were dead. However, if someone had used the mirror image technique and maintained it by relying on an array, just like the illusory palace, the result would be terrifying. Clearly, there was a premeditated plan to attract the youngest generation of geniuses of the continent here. As for why they were attracted here, Qin Hao couldn't guess what the person behind the scenes wanted to do. If Li Wanji hadn't asked me to find the truth of Empress Xuantian's death for him, and if I hadn't stored the original bodies of the 12 battle suits in my space ring, I'm afraid I would have been kept in the dark. The more Qin Hao thought about it, the more frightened he became. And Muri was the biggest surprise. Eastern Sky once told him that Muri was dead, and everyone in the Divine Palace thought that Muri was dead. But in fact, the person who died was Eastern Sky. It was the entire divine palace that was destroyed. Senior Sister Muri was the only survivor after the disaster, and she was the only Orthodox disciple left in the divine palace. It wasn't until now that Qin Hao understood why Muri was so panicked when she realized that he had seen through her. Chapter 15-17. Muri was not afraid of Qin Hao. At most, she was surprised for a moment. What she was truly afraid of was the terrifying existence that destroyed the divine palace. Perhaps that terror was still here. Any one of the 7 peaks could be him. This person set up an illusion formation to confuse the geniuses who came to the divine palace. However, he would not have thought that Qin Hao's body was formed from 10,000 spirits. His eyes had the ability to see through the essence of things. Although he did not know what spell Muri used to be able to blend in among the dead souls without being detected. However, Qin Hao could see her. How could she not be nervous at that time? He has the ability to set up arrays. Could it be? A person flashed through Qin Hao's mind. He was so shocked that he sat up from the bed. Yun Yi Peak Master, Yun Yi Perfected Lord. Was it him? Yun Yi's array skills were at the peak of perfection. He was unfathomable and could be called the #1 array master in the world. He had won Qin Hao's admiration several times. If there were suspicions, Yun Yi was the most likely. It was very likely that he had set up everything. There was no doubt that his array skills were strong. However, as a Nirvana realm cultivator, even with the help of array skills, it was not realistic to kill the other 6 peak masters and the chief in one go. Qin Hao had some understanding of the Nirvana realm. This realm was too strong. It was almost beyond life and death. It was not easy to die. Under the situation of 1 against 6, and also facing Eastern Sky, Shenghua and Yizue, this group of chief disciples with extraordinary strength, old Taoist Yun Yi's chances of victory were almost 0. Even if he had great ability, he could not kill so many people in one fell swoop. Moreover, he was not the only one in the Divine Palace who knew about arrays. Xiantian Peak also knew about arrays. The old man Daozong was familiar with the 10,000 scrolls of Taoism. He must have seen through a certain level of array skills. In addition, Qin Hao's master Tian Quan also knew about arrays. Tian Quan was the master of the Divine Palace. Like Qin Hao, he was taught by the previous generation's 7 peak masters. He was naturally familiar with all kinds of array skills. Although Migres had yet to unleash his full power, once he did, his power would definitely be the most terrifying of the 7 peak. This point could be seen from Dong Tian and Qin Hao. People from the Migres main peak had innate talent and ability that could crush their generation. All of them were unparalleled. Qin Hao's brows immediately furrowed into a ball. Analyzing from the aspect of ability and expertise, old Taoist Yun Yi was the most suspicious. But in terms of martial prowess, Migres was the strongest in the Divine Palace. He had the best chance of killing others, not the other way around. Who could it be? Qin Hao held his head with both hands. His thoughts were in a mess. They were all suspects. Perhaps I should go to the pavilion next door and see if I can find a wisp of Senior Sister's aura. After the trial ended, Senior Sister did not show her face again. Perhaps even she didn't know who the terror hiding behind the scenes was. However, after hiding for so many years, she more or less knew some secret. Qin Hao wanted to talk to her in detail. It was better to have 2 people to analyze than 1 person. Now in the Divine Palace, Muri was Qin Hao's only fellow disciple. They had a true relationship. Let's go find Senior Sister. Qin Hao got out of bed and went straight to Muri's courtyard. It was best not to let anyone know about this matter first, in case it was accidentally leaked and forced the person behind the scenes to act in advance. That would be no good for anyone. It would undoubtedly be a disaster. After all, Qin Hao felt a strong threat from the other party. With his current ability, he was far from being able to control the situation. Even if he used everything and released all his king spirits, it would be useless. The other party was so powerful that he could kill a Nirvana realm cultivator. He could be said to be invincible. Qin Hao ran all the way to Muri's courtyard. Everything in his mind gradually became clear. He basically confirmed the fact that the Xiantian peak was Empress Xiantian. It was probably on the day the Divine Palace was destroyed. The Xiantian peak escaped to the outside world with injuries and created the Hidden Dragon's secret realm. Unfortunately, he was too seriously injured and still couldn't escape death. The 12 battlesuits might have been seriously injured at that time. In order to protect Empress Xiantian, the 12 artifact spirits were damaged and couldn't perform at their peak. Otherwise, Qin Hao couldn't have subdued them in the Hidden Dragon's secret realm. The peak power of the battlesuits was comparable to that of 12 great emperors. Because they were too seriously injured, their power of rules was constantly weakened. Every time they attacked, they would consume their vitality, which would cause their cultivation to be greatly weakened. Otherwise, with Qin Hao's high-level king realm cultivation at that time, one arrow from the Sagittarius Palace would have been enough to annihilate him. Qin Hao felt more and more uneasy. He had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. In particular, the souls of the Peak Masters would be holding the Seven Peaks Summit. Could it be controlled by the person behind the scenes? He thought of a sentence that had been passed down for thousands of years on the continent. The signs of the Divine Palace mean certain death. No matter which generation of geniuses, the death rate was as high as 100%. Then why did all these people die? Even though the signs were dangerous, Qin Hao didn't believe that no one could pass. After all, 700 geniuses of their generation had successfully entered the Divine Palace. Although it was a fake Divine Palace, there must be some talented geniuses of the previous generations who could come here like them. After entering the Divine Palace, where did those people go? Qin Hao felt more and more uneasy because of the unknown. It was as if darkness was surrounding them, but they couldn't predict it. Only by finding Muri as soon as possible could they deal with the unknown danger. Muri might be the only one of the geniuses of their generation who could leave the Divine Palace alive. Creak. When he pushed open the door of the courtyard, a bleak and desolate feeling hit him in the face. It was as if no one had come to this courtyard for thousands of years, making him feel depressed. Little junior brother? There were 2 people in the courtyard. Eastern Sky and Zhang Yu were sitting on the stone steps and seemed to be talking about something. At this time, they were surprised to see Qin Hao. Eldest senior brother, second senior brother. Qin Hao looked at the 2 with mixed feelings. They were breathing and full of vitality, but he could imagine that they were actually 2 dead people. It seems that you like this place very much. Master asked you to come to us? Eastern Sky, as usual, smiled elegantly and made people feel comfortable. He pointed to the stone steps beside him and asked Qin Hao to sit down. Yes, Master asked me to come to you, senior brothers. He wants to hear your suggestions for the cultivation exchange. Qin Hao also walked over and sat beside Eastern Sky. It seemed that his senior sister had never been here. No suggestions. They haven't taken down the position of Peak Master yet, but they want to leave it for us to worry about. Dream on, Zhang Yu said. He wasn't young, but compared to the lifespan of the 7 Peak Masters, he was still a junior. He didn't want to go back and face a group of old antiques. It was so annoying. At this time, Eastern Sky stretched out his palm and put it on Qin Hao's wrist. At this time, a surge of vitality rushed into Qin Hao's body. It was incomparably vigorous, like an endless sea. But the moment it entered his body, it flowed calmly like a stream. Eldest senior brother, you. Qin Hao looked at Eastern Sky. That arrow must have consumed a lot of your soul power, right? It's fine in front of outsiders, but you don't have to force yourself in front of your senior brother, silly boy. Eastern Sky smiled and moved his palm back. Senior brother. Qin Hao felt his eyes sting. The arrow in the Xiantian Dao sect had indeed consumed a lot of his soul power. Even though his soul power was strong and could ignore the artifact spirit's invasion, when he shot that arrow, he had to use the artifact spirit's laws and Dao intent. He had to use the Sunset Heart Sutra to stabilize his aura. Of course, the consumption was astonishing. Denda's use of his ultimate skill was not as easy as it seemed to others. If he could use the sunset arrow art at will, he would have already swept through the divine wilderness. Others would always see his powerful and unstoppable side. But Eastern Sky knew the pain he had suffered. "Why are you looking at me like that? I'm not your senior sister, ha ha ha." Eastern Sky laughed. Qin Hao realized that he had lost his composure. He smiled and said, "Senior brother, you and second senior brother are about to leave the Divine Palace. Do you have any wishes that you haven't fulfilled?" Wishes? Eastern Sky seemed to recall something. He smiled and looked at the sky. He said slowly, "It's not a wish. I just want to go back home and take a look." He had participated in the sign and entered the Divine Palace to cultivate for 700 years, reaching the Nirvana Great Emperor realm. Time flew by. His family members were probably all dead. After all, Eastern Sky's lifespan was very long, and his family was not strong. The average cultivation of his family members was very weak, only 100 years. Even if there were people alive, most of them were descendants of his family. As for his blood relatives, they had died long ago. Even so, Eastern Sky missed his home. He missed the homeland that had raised him. If necessary, he would do his best to improve the lives of his family's descendants. "My family is located in the East Continent's Qilin Dao mountain range. It's a side branch of the Qilin Dao sect. My real name is Bai Lu." After coming to the Divine Palace, he changed his name to Eastern Sky. Shermu too. The Sher family is also a branch of the Qilin Dao sect. They are from the same sect as our Shi family. Eastern Sky laughed. Once upon a time, he and Shermu were like brothers. Their families were from the same sect. But the cultivation world was like this. If you were too strong, you would be easily envied. If you were too weak, you would be despised and bullied. Did the Qilin Dao sect once have a Qilin Great Emperor? Qin Hao asked. You know about it too? Eastern Sky was pleasantly surprised. In that case, the Dao sect was still teaching in the mortal world. If the Dao sect was here, their clan would be here. After all, Qin Hao had only been in the Divine Palace for 3 years. Eastern Sky had cultivated here for 700 years. He was often worried that the Dao sect would decline and disappear from the world. I know a little. Qin Hao nodded. But that was before he died. Moreover, before Qin Hao stepped into Dendi, he had cultivated for more than 400 years. He seemed to have gone to the Qilin Dao mountain with Zhan Wu and Han Lingxian. He vaguely remembered that there were some conflict. At that time, they had yet to establish the Daqin Empire. But now it had been too long. The Dao sect might not still exist. This sect was too old. However, Qin Hao didn't say it because he was afraid of hurting Eastern Sky's heart. That's good. I want to go back to the Dao Mountain to take a look and see the people of the Shi family again. That's enough. Eastern Sky looked very excited. He had the urge to immediately fly out of the Divine Palace. Second senior brother, what about you? Qin Hao asked. He didn't know if Zhang Yu had any wishes. Zhang Yu was stunned. He waved his hand and said, I'm an orphan. I was snatched from the mouth of a wild dog by a master in the outside world. My master raised me. Later, my master was challenged and killed. My sect was also destroyed. I escaped from the sect. After my cultivation reached a high level, I helped my master take revenge. Later, I participated in the Divine Palace's omen. There's nothing to miss in the mortal world. It's just that. Zhang Yu paused. His eyes flashed with sadness. He lowered his head and sighed. I don't have any wishes. I just want to go out with eldest senior brother and visit your senior sister's family. I want to do something that I can. Qin Hao's heartstrings trembled. At this time, his two senior brothers were still thinking about their senior sister. Zhang Yu didn't have any wishes. He wanted to go back and do something for Muri. But they didn't know that he was already a dead person. He was just a remnant soul. Qin Hao clenched his fists slightly. He secretly remembered that if he could leave the Divine Palace alive, he would definitely go to the Qilin Dao Mountain for Eastern Sky's senior brother. Chapter 1518. Qian Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Unresigned. In the following period of time, the Seven Peaks began to set up the venue for the Tao discussion ceremony. The venue was still the Cloud E Peak. The elders of each peak led a portion of the disciples, and they were extremely busy. The entire Divine Palace was filled with a lively atmosphere. The Seven Peaks Tao discussion ceremony was second only to the ancestral worship ceremony. It was the handover ceremony of the two chief disciples, and it was extremely solemn. After that, a portion of people walked out of the Divine Palace and returned to the mortal world. Unless summoned by the Divine Palace, they were not allowed to step into the sect's sacred ground again. They were also not allowed to reveal that they had cultivated in the Divine Palace. After hundreds of years of teacher-student relationship, although the Seven Peak Venerables had exceedingly high cultivation and transcended the mortal world, they still couldn't help but feel sad. However, most of the disciples were still comprehending the Divine Soldier's rules and Tao intent at Xiantian Peak. These disciples all had extraordinary talent and placed great importance on cultivation. At the critical juncture of leaving the Divine Palace, they cherished the little time they had left. The weaker disciples helped the elders set up the venue, while the outstanding ones were busy cultivating. The division of labor was clear. However, Qin Hao couldn't calm down. As the Tao discussion ceremony approached, he felt more and more uneasy, as if something was going to happen. That day, after chatting with his two senior brothers, he remembered Eastern Sky's wish. After that, he repeatedly went to Muri's courtyard several times, but he still couldn't sense her aura. The anxiety in his heart grew more and more restless. Finally, the day arrived. The Tao discussion ceremony was held at the Cloud E Peak. The disciples of the Seven Peaks gathered at the Cloud E Peak, and no one from each peak remained. The disciples of the Xiantian Dojo also stopped cultivating and dressed up to participate in the Tao discussion ceremony. On this day, there were no clouds in the sky above the Divine Palace, and it was as blue as water. In the void, there was a layer of divine light rippling, showing the majesty of a supreme martial arts holy land. Looking from afar, the seven peaks of the Divine Palace, which reached into the clouds, were like divine palaces reaching into the sky. Cranes circled around them. It was like a scene from the mortal world. Auspicious signs, the three of you, translation. You three get dressed. As old man Migres lectured, his short figure stepped out of the Migres palace. He was dressed in an emerald green robe, and on his chest was a large chrysanthemum that bloomed in the sun. The word authority was imprinted in the center of the chrysanthemum, and it was awe-inspiring. Translation, 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 translation. Translation, 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 translation of translation, 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 translation of translation, 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 brother, translation, 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 translation. Translation, 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 translation. Something happened during my cultivation yesterday. It's fine. Eastern Sky's face trembled as he gritted his teeth. He didn't even dare to look at her, and there was humiliation in his eyes. Today is a joyous occasion, so don't give old man that face. Otherwise, I'll cast a spell so that the three of you can wear it when you return to the secular world. You won't be able to take it off, humph. Tian Quan stomped his feet and a platinum flame spread out from the bottom of his feet. His short stature soared into the sky like a goshawk, and with a flash of light, his aura instantly moved to Uni Peak. How could the clothes that he had carefully modified be so bad? Let's go. Eastern Sky resisted the urge to retch. The three of them rose from the ground and headed towards Cloud Freedom Dao Peak. At this moment, numerous figures were walking in the sky. It was a grand sight to behold. The people of the 7 peaks were all heading towards Yun-E Dojo. Eastern Sky deliberately slowed down. He looked around the entire divine palace and said, "After staying here for more than 700 years, I can finally go out." He changed his name to Eastern Sky because he missed the East Continent and hoped that one day he could return to his hometown with glory. His wish would come true today. At this moment, Eastern Sky and Chang Yu had a rare look of excitement on their faces. Qin Hao stood in the void and also looked at the divine palace. Although the 7 peaks covered a large area, he couldn't see the edge of it. It was as if he couldn't see the boundary of the divine palace. The further he went, the blurrier it became, like a layer of fog. The celestial palace is enveloped by a barrier, and the source of the array is located at the Cloud Change Peak. Unless the 7 peak venerables join forces to activate the array, otherwise, this disciple will not be able to break the barrier and leave this place. Dong Tian seemed to have seen through Qin Hao's doubts and explained. Qin Hao nodded. Was it sealed by a nirvana-level boundary? No wonder. Even if Eastern Sky was such a tyrannical existence, when he was alive, he was afraid that he would not be able to force his way in. Thinking of this, Qin Hao looked at Uni Peak in the distance. Was the origin of the boundary at Uni Peak? His gaze landed on the Cloud Shift Peak. The peak of the peak was smooth as if it had been forcibly shaved off. The entire mountain was like a millstone. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but when he looked at it, Qin Hao felt as if the Cloud Shift Peak was moving, as if the millstone was grinding. However, when he looked again, he found that Uni Peak was motionless. Is it my illusion? Qin Hao muttered. 2 blood-red flames appeared in the depths of his eyes. His eyes faintly turned scarlet. Invisibly, a pair of eyes that seemed to be able to see through everything swept towards Uni Peak like 2 rays of light. Except for the powerful fluctuations of the formation, he still didn't find any abnormalities. There was no sign of the giant peak moving. Impossible. Qin Hao rubbed his eyes. Although he had stood in the void and looked at Uni Peak more than once, when he first came to the Divine Palace, he would go there once a month. But now, the strange millstone-like giant peak gave him a sense of horror. It was like a coffin that buried the world, a blood mill that could crush everything. Qin Hao's fiery eyes suddenly extinguished. A stinging pain came from his eyes. His mind seemed to have been hit by a powerful external force. His yuan qi stagnated, and he almost fell from the sky. What's wrong? Eastern Sky hurriedly reached out and grabbed Qin Hao. His yuan qi stagnated while flying. Did he want to die? Staring at Uni Peak made my mind a little chaotic. I couldn't control it well. Qin Hao slapped his head twice. The shock of the external force came and his mind recovered. The entire Uni Peak is made up of countless arrays. I don't know if there are hundreds or thousands of arrays. It is the most indestructible of the 7 peaks. It is even harder than the Migres main peak. How dare you use your mind to spy on it? A familiar voice came. A long line of people flew over from behind. The person in the lead was extraordinary. It was the chief disciple of Daozong Peak, Shenghua. Seeing Qin Hao and the other 2, Shimu, who was beside Shenghua, lowered his head. Senior Shenghua. Qin Hao smiled and glanced at Shimu. Shimu had his head lowered. Although he was wearing Daozong Peak's robes and had been tidied up, His hair was still a little messy. It seemed that he was not in good spirits. Peak Serene is very strong. Eastern Sky and I didn't dare to spy on it. Don't be careless next time, Shenghua said. Among the thousands of arrays on Peak, there were dozens of yuan-breaking arrays that could interfere with a martial artist's will. Once a martial artist's will was too deep, they would fall into a coma. Qin Hao nodded. Was Peak that strong? It was even stronger than Migres Peak. No wonder the enchantment that enveloped the Divine Palace spread out from Peak. Even a Nirvana realm martial artist couldn't break it or escape. Gotcha. Qin Hao's mind seemed to have been struck by lightning. His body trembled slightly. Even a Nirvana realm martial artist couldn't break it. Did this mean that Peak Serene could kill a Nirvana realm martial artist? If they were caught off guard, Daoist Yun-Yi could control the giant peak array and pour its power on the other 6 peak masters. Even if it couldn't kill them, they would at least suffer some injuries. Moreover, it could lead the array to trap the 6 peak masters and the chief disciple and gradually nibble away. This murderer, could it really be Daoist Yun-Yi? Qin Hao's heart tensed up. With his research on arrays, it was obviously far from the level of trapping a Nirvana realm martial artist. He didn't know if there was such an array, but who was Daoist Yun-Yi? The Divine Palace's #1 Array Emperor, Nirvana Array Emperor, unparalleled in Array Dao. Perhaps he could really do it. And why was the 7 Peaks Dao discussion held at Uni Dojo? Was history repeating itself? A chill ran down his spine. Just thinking about it made Qin Hao terrified. If Daoist Yun-Yi controlled the array and bombarded the dojo, none of their disciples would survive. Hey, you dare to let me see you? I'll kill you! Zhou Wudao's figure flashed, and he suddenly rushed toward one of the people from Daozong Peak's team. The ferocious force directly knocked Zhou Wudao out of the team. The two figures tangled together, and they were sent flying into the distance. What's going on? Shenghua was stunned. Eastern Sky and Zhang Yu were also puzzled and looked over. Are you crazy? Zhou Wudao was about to fight back. Boom! Qin Hao's 9 Palaces battle against Dili erupted. A beam of light penetrated his right fist. Suddenly, the heaven and earth spiritual qi crazily surged, gathering endless violent power in his fist. Another punch landed on Zhou Wudao's cheek, directly smashing his words back into his throat. If you don't want to die, shut up. Qin Hao's throat emitted a low and deep sound. His hands were tightly pressed against Zhou Wudao's throat, not allowing the other party to make a sound. The storage ring at the tip of his finger emitted a bright light. It flew out and slipped onto Zhou Wudao's finger. At that moment, a wave of willpower flew out from Qin Hao's forehead and entered Zhou Wudao's mind. Zhou Wudao only felt a tide of information crazily rushing into his mind, almost driving him crazy. But in the next second, his eyes widened like copper bells, full of horror. Don't let me see you again. Qin Hao loosened his palm and sent Zhou Wudao flying downwards with a kick. He secretly transmitted his voice, Don't disappoint me. Our lives are all in your hands. After saying that, Qin Hao's qi surged and flew back to Eastern Sky's side, his face still full of resentment. Shenghua didn't know what to say. Why did he hit people for no reason? It seemed that the relationship between Zhou Wudao and Qin Hao wasn't bad. I just opened the right fist palace with the 9 Palaces Battle Emperor art. My hand was itchy and I couldn't control it. Qin Hao smiled at Shenghua. It's okay, it's okay. Shenghua turned his head and looked down, shouting, Junior brother Zhou, are you okay? I'm fine. Zhou Wudao covered his mouth with his sleeve and flew back. Although he covered it up, it could still be seen that the injured part was swollen. Next time, be gentler. Eastern Sky scolded. His junior brother had always had a strange temper. He didn't know what was wrong with him, but he suddenly attacked. This bad temper, was quite similar to his style. The disciples of Migres Palace should be so domineering, suppressing the 6 peaks. Qin Hao smiled and didn't say anything. Shenghua will go first. Eastern skies Yuan Qi shook, and a raging platinum luster wrapped around Chang Yu and Qin Hao. Like an arrow leaving the group, they instantly pulled away from the group of Daozong Peak and landed in Uni Peak. After hitting people, you don't even have a chance to ask for revenge. Shenghua was helpless. The disciples of Migres Palace were a group of bandits. He looked at Zhou Wudao and said, "Are you really okay? If I'm in trouble, can senior brother help me take revenge?" Zhou Wudao moved his sleeve and said with his sausage-like mouth, "I didn't see anything." Shenghua's Yuan Qi shook, wrapped around Shermu, and teleported away, leaving behind a group of lonely junior brothers and sisters. This is the difference between the 2 peaks, Sighs came from the group of Daozong Peak. The figures scattered and flew towards Uni Training Hall. "What's going on?" Xiao Han came to Zhou Wudao's side. Although Qin Hao was fierce, he was a man of principle and would never hit people for no reason. Zhou Wudao shook his head and didn't say anything. But the ring on his hand flashed, and a silver light, so fast that it couldn't be blinked, entered Xiao Han's body. The moment the silver light entered his body, Qin Hao's voice rang in his mind. In an instant, Xiao Han's expression changed drastically. "What's wrong?" Shou Wuk asked. Whoosh! Another silver light entered Shou Wuk's body. In the next second, Shou Wuk's expression changed to Xiao Han's. "Do you understand?" Zhou Wudao looked at Shou Wuk with a sullen face. "Fight with your life." Shou Wuk's expression was extremely solemn. Chapter 15-19. In the vast void, figures stepped through the air and landed on Uni Peak. At this moment, the empty space in Uni Training Hall was gradually filled with figures. No one from the peaks remained. From the peak elders to the chief disciples, everyone had gathered here. The scene was awe-inspiring. In the training hall, the disciples of each peak were arranged in 6 square formations. The 6 formations stood side by side, each with a different aura. Taiwei Peak's formation was filled with the aura of the Great Path of Life. Uni Peak's formation was like a large formation. The formation light above the formation shone brightly. The disciples of Yaoguang Peak were elegant. There seemed to be a resonance between them. If one listened carefully, one could faintly hear a beautiful melody. However, when one listened to it again, it was silent. Daozong Peak cultivated tens of thousands of techniques and had many disciples. Their auras were mixed. The Mizar Peak Master's great path of slaughter was met with a fierce, murderous aura that made one tense up. The disciples of the mysterious Heaven Peak all carried hammers on their back. They were steady, mellow, and gave off a sense of peace. However, their quiet bodies seemed to contain a powerful force that could shatter the heavens and shatter the earth. The disciples of the 6 peaks were orderly. They all stood facing the front of the training hall. In front of the training hall, there was a solemn platform. The 7 peak elders stood in the center. The elders of each peak were lined up in order. The previous chief and the second chief stood at the 2 sides of the platform. They were like 2 groups of guards, standing respectfully. At this moment, Qin Hao was also in the chief's team. He was the only disciple in this year's Migres Palace. No one competed with him for the position of chief. After today's sparring session, he would inherit the position of Eastern Sky. Naturally, he had to stand with the chief of each peak. Moreover, if he stood alone in the training hall, he would appear lonely and eye-catching. Figures continued to descend from the sky and arrived at the Dao field. Qin Hao stood beside Dong Tian with his hands clasped behind his back and his chest puffed out. He looked extremely calm, but in fact, he was panicking in his heart. At this moment, every nerve in his body was stretched taut as he stood in the Dao field. Above his head was a nirvana-level grand array. That terrifying power could flatten everything in an instant, obliterating all the disciples of the 7 peak. At this moment, Qin Hao felt as though he had returned to the God Burial Valley and was trapped in the 9 Heavens Gods Punishment Array. He felt as though he would die in the next second. Wait for death? I can't wait for death. I can't wait for death in this lifetime. Qin Hao scanned the crowd in the training hall, looking at Xiao Han, Zhou Wudao, Shou Wuk, Yi Shuihan, Xiaogua, and so on. His true love, brothers, and family were all in the training hall. He was no longer alone. In his previous life, he had fallen into the God-punishing array. It was his bad luck. So what if he died? However, if something were to happen today, he would not be the only one to die. Everyone would be buried in this training ground. He had to resist, especially since he couldn't contact Muri. He had to do something to prevent himself from being caught off guard when danger came. Regardless of whether what he did was useful or not, at least he would feel more grounded. Even if he was wrong in the end and the Peak Sovereign punished him, he would have to take the blame. Shou Wuk and the others secretly exchanged glances with Qin Hao. In truth, they were all very nervous. After all, the news they received was too shocking. No matter what the outcome was, today would be the most unforgettable day of their lives. At the intersection of Uni Peak and Alcade Peak, in the depths of a valley surrounded by mountains. In the center of the valley there was a steep stone platform. It was like a giant stone pillar that extended into the air. At the top of the pillar sat an unyielding figure. This figure had a head of messy white hair that fluttered in the wind. He was motionless like a statue. His face was calm and his fists were clenched. At this time, the power of thunder flashed and flowed along the stone walls. Finally, it gathered in the air of the valley and turned into tribulation thunder. With a loud crack, a bolt of lightning struck down, striking the body of the stone pillar. Chang Helo trembled. He didn't resist. He allowed the thunder to wreak havoc throughout his body, causing his bones to creak as he remained motionless. Then, a fiery light burned down like a fire dragon wrapping around the stone pillar, swallowing him up. His expression didn't change. Even though his body was burning red, he still didn't resist. He allowed the fire to burn him. Cold wind and snow, sharp wind blades, sweeping waves, they struck the stone pillar again and again, crashing into Chang Helo's body. Different strengths wreaked havoc within his body. The power of the great Tao formed by the array formation brought him unimaginable pain. His cultivation was sealed, and he could only withstand it with his body. On the day he returned from the trial, he had been imprisoned here. The Dustfall platform was covered in 8 layers of enchantments. At all times, it would be struck by thunder and burned by fire. I wonder what great day it is today. Chang Helo's messy silver hair parted. He looked up, revealing a scarred face as he looked up at the skies. Outside the enchantment, he could faintly hear some noise. Presumably, the Divine Palace was holding another great opportunity for their disciples to sublimate themselves. Unfortunately, he couldn't participate, nor could he participate. Was he wrong? Being struck by thunder, burned by fire, flooded by water, and frozen by ice, he still didn't think he was wrong. He couldn't change his humble birth, but he had the opportunity to change his future. He was unwilling to be mediocre and was determined to climb up. He only wanted to stand at the peak of martial arts and sweep away dangers and obstacles. This was the instinct of a warrior. Even if his methods were despicable, what was wrong with that? But it seemed that his way of doing things wasn't recognized. It was like this in the outside world and in the Divine Palace. No one could empathize with him. No one would think for him. During this time, even the people of the Xianyuan family hadn't come to the Dustfall platform once. Not even one person was willing to come and see him. Was this the treatment of Xianyuan Wuying's adopted son? Chang Helo sneered. It turned out that he had always been alone. Buzz. Suddenly, there was a vibration of power from above. It was extremely tyrannical. The thunderbolts that were about to converge above Chang Helo's head were swept by this power and instantly disintegrated. A dazzling brilliance spread over the top of his head, and the enchantment above the dustfall platform was opened. Then, a bright figure descended from the sky, like a goddess of the 9 heavens slowly descending. Her body was surging with incomparably powerful holy light. She came to the same height as the stone pillar, and a pair of flawless beautiful eyes looked calmly at Chang-Helo. Master! Chang-Helo's heart trembled, and he looked slightly surprised. Come out. Go to the Uni Peak to participate in the 7 Peaks Tao discussion ceremony. Yao Guang Xianjun said. She waved her palace robe, and a divine halo descended upon Chang-Helo's body, washing away the dust on him. When the halo dissipated, Chang-Helo was wearing a pure white Yao Guang palace robe. The traces of wind and frost on his face had all disappeared, and he had regained his handsome appearance. Master asked you to let me out? Chang-Helo asked. Is the imprisonment period over? No, I just couldn't bear to see you miss the handover ceremony of the 2 chief disciples, so I let you out first. After the Tao discussion, you still have to return to the Dustfall platform until Master Gong truly releases you. Yao Guang Xianjun said slowly. This day was very important to the disciples of the 7 Peaks, and was equally important to Chang-Helo's future. He had a chance to change his fate. Let me out temporarily? Chang-Helo shook his head. What's the point? Master, please go back. With that, he sat back down on the stone pillar. Yao Guang Xianjun was not under the orders of Geezer Tianquan, but had made the decision on her own. Since that was the case, he would not leave. He would only leave when Geezer Tianquan personally released him. Yao Guang Xianjun frowned slightly. You don't want to be the chief disciple of the Yao Guang Peak. If that's the case, why did you come to the Divine Palace? Stepping into the Divine Palace was to surpass oneself and cultivate the Tao of the Great Emperor that no cultivator of the outside world could reach. There were 4 levels of the Tao of the Emperor, and each level was a whole new level. In the illusory palace trial, in order to get rid of Qin Hao, you would rather poison Lan Qingwu and Su Jin, and drag the disciples of Xiantian Peak, Mizar Peak, and Daozong Peak down with you. Wasn't it all so that you could go further and see the scenery from a peak that no one else could? Now the opportunity is right in front of you. The position of chief disciple is close at hand. As long as you fight for it, you can inherit my legacy in the future. Yet you want to give it up? Yao Guang asked Chang-Helo. Chang-Helo raised his head, looked at the sacred and inviolable Yao Guang Peak Master, and asked, Master, do you think I've done anything wrong? Yao Guang stared at Chang-Helo. She stared at him for a long time until Chang-Helo couldn't take her gaze anymore and looked away. Only then did Yao Guang slowly take in a deep breath and sigh. How can one truly differentiate between right and wrong on the path of cultivation? It's all about one's own effort. To not be manipulated by others, to not live under others' roof, to fight against fate, to fight against the heavens, to break the 6 paths of reincarnation, to one day surpass all living beings. However, cultivation is the Tao. Why do you cultivate? Who do you cultivate for? Just for yourself? Yao Guang, immortal monarch, turned around and slowly flew into the sky above the valley. Life is too short. Even the Nirvana Great Emperor has a limited lifespan. Perhaps living doesn't mean only cultivation. It's not bad to stop occasionally and look at the scenery around you. Like me, I teach a few disciples in my spare time, even though you killed 2 of them. Now that your shackles have been removed and your cultivation has been restored, the barrier above Fallen Dust Valley will be restored in 10 breaths of time. Whether or not you want to participate in the Tao debate is up to you. With that, Yao Guang's aura returned to Cloud E's training hall. Lan Qingwu was dead, Su Jin's soul had been changed, and she'd lost 2 beloved disciples. How could she not feel pain? Even though the Nirvana Great Emperor had severed her desires, she was still human. But what could she do? Kill Chang-Helo and avenge her dead disciples? Chang-Helo was also her disciple. Just like how she'd accepted Guden, Why couldn't she give Chang Hello another chance? Yao Guang left, but her words struck deep into Chang Helo's heart. Why do you cultivate? Who do you cultivate for? What is your original intention? Is it only for yourself? Perhaps it's not bad to stop and look at the scenery around you. I'll fight the Tao debate on behalf of my master. Rumble, in the void, a layer of transparent ripples began to converge towards the center. The instant the barrier closed, Chang Hello, who was sitting on the stone pillar, suddenly burst forth with primordial qi. Like a beam of light, he shot into the sky. The moment he rushed out of the barrier, his state of mind became clear, as if it had been cleansed. The haze in his heart was removed, and he felt unprecedentedly relaxed. Even his breathing was incomparably smooth. His body was burning with an extremely firm and indestructible power. This power didn't come from him, but rather from Yao Guang's will. It was the first time he'd realized that fighting and working hard for others could be so powerful. Chapter 1520. Cloud Change Peak. More and more figures gathered in the training field, but it wasn't chaotic. Every figure that landed would automatically integrate into the 6 square formations, standing respectfully until not a single trace of human energy could be felt from the other 6 peaks. On the left side of the platform, Qin Hao stood quietly in the middle of the formation of the chief disciples. Everyone else's attention was on today's session. The low-level disciples hoped to rise in status and rank through their performance. The personal disciples wanted to compete for the chief disciple position and fight for the 12 divine soldier. As for Qin Hao, he remained unmoved. He was now worried about his life and death. He had a feeling that today's session was unusual, and something big was going to happen. His uneasiness grew stronger and stronger. He had his own plan and would not let the crisis come and wait for death. But he could not guarantee that his plan would succeed and prevent the unknown danger. It depended on how the others performed. At this moment there was an extremely fast, ear-piercing sound in the void. 2 streams of light, one in front and one behind, flew into the training ground one after another. The first figure was Yao Guang Fairy Lord. The person behind her was Chang Hello. Yao Guang Fairy Lord returned to the platform and sat back down. Tian Quan did not say anything and continued to chat with old man Daozong, as if he did not see Chang Hello enter. Chang Hello was punished on the fallen dust platform, but now that Yao Guang had personally brought him here, Tian Quan naturally could not drive him away. He was the master of the divine palace and was not so narrow-minded. On the other hand, the disciples of Yao Guang Peak looked a little unnatural when they saw Chang Hello return, but they did not say anything. Occasionally, a few disciples would sneer, which was quite harsh to the ear. Everyone is here. Master, the Tao discussion can begin. Eastern Sky stepped forward and said. Tian Quan nodded and straightened his posture. His eyes swept across the training ground, and his voice was as loud as a bell. Ancestors, since the establishment of the Divine Palace, there have been 100 sessions. We have nurtured countless disciples and passed down the teachings of martial arts. His voice was unusually forceful and spread out from the training ground of Uni Peak to the 7 Peak. It resounded throughout the Divine Palace, and its power swept in all directions. However, after Ancestor Wu Jun, no one from the Divine Palace has ascended to the divine level. It is a great regret, and also a regret for the martial arts of the divine wilderness. Today, I am the current master of the Celestial Palace, the leader of the Migres Palace, and the 819 disciples of the Nurturing God Palace. I have inherited the grand aspirations of the ancestors and passed down the spirit of the martial way. My disciples have succeeded and are here to discuss the Tao. I hope that the ancestors will protect me and our orthodoxy will last forever. Thank you, Peak Venerables, for your guidance. Whoosh! More than half of the disciples in the training ground. These people were all disciples of the Divine Palace, disciples of the Divine Palace. But once they stepped out of the Divine Palace, they were no longer people of the Divine Palace. According to the rules of the Ancestral Palace, in the secular world, you are not allowed to announce that you have cultivated in the Divine Palace, and you are not allowed to use the name of the Divine Palace to stir up trouble. Migres stood up and said, "Heavens!" The 6 peak masters stood up at the same time. Waves of Nirvana realm aura shot up to the sky and swept through the world. The endless power turned into the power of the heavens, intimidating the disciples present. The terrifying will seem to be engraved into everyone's soul, making them tremble. Those who violate this will be destroyed by the heavens and earth. Everyone who knelt said in unison and swore to the heavens. You can't say that you have cultivated in the Divine Palace, and you can't use the name of the Divine Palace to cause trouble. It's just like what Uncle Shao-Yi said to me before I came. Qin Hao recalled. The number 1 array emperor of the northern frontier, Yen Laobei, was once a disciple of the Divine Palace. Moreover, he was the only survivor of that year, and he was close friends with Shao-Yi. However, Master Tianquan didn't strictly order that once the disciples of the Divine Palace left the sect, they couldn't pass on the teachings they learned to the outside world. Moreover, from the looks of it, he didn't intend to erase the disciples' memories. This was a little different from what Qin Hao had imagined before he joined the meeting. Next, the disciples of the 7 peaks can learn from each other. You have cultivated for hundreds of years, and today may be the last time you exchange and discuss. Each peak is good at different things. Show what you have learned over the years to your heart's content. Disciples of 2 batches can learn from each other, or you can learn from each other. Remember, don't go too far. Tianquan said and sat down with the other 6 peak masters. At this moment, the 7 of them seemed to have aged hundreds of years, but their faces were full of satisfaction. Since the establishment of the Divine Palace, there had been countless outstanding people. As the elders of the older generation, they had completed their task and could take off the heavy burden. As for the future of the Divine Palace, it would fall on the preachers of the eastern sky. Then, it would be Qin Hao and the others. For a time, countless figures walked out of the training hall. The old disciples, the new disciples, and the old disciples of the 2 worlds exchanged martial arts techniques and methods. Since the day they entered the Divine Palace, they had learned different things. But at this moment they could learn from each other. It was a rare opportunity. In the training hall, rays of brilliance surged, incomparably powerful. It was difficult to see the real body of many of the figures. Only the afterimages collided back and forth, causing a burst of energy shockwaves. All kinds of power of rules and different types of primordial spirits constantly appeared in the training hall. The disciples of the various peaks enjoyed the process of learning from each other. There were even new disciples who joined forces with disciples of the previous batch and began a 4-on-4 collision. There were also people of the Uni Peak who formed a wonderful array, allowing the disciples of the Daozong Peak and the Mizang Palace to join forces to attack. Looking at the gorgeous and colorful battle in the training hall, if it weren't for the dark clouds in Qin Hao's heart, he would have calmed down and enjoyed it carefully. After all, this kind of high-level and high-quality competition was very helpful for improving one's martial art. Unfortunately, he wasn't in the mood now. Shou Wuk, the successor of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor of the East Continent, Feng Qianli, took a step forward. The sword intent around him was like a sharp sword clanging. His sharp eyes stared at the genius from the Wuk sword sect. After cultivating in the Divine Palace for more than 3 years, we haven't really fought in a real sense. Why don't we take this opportunity to exchange swordsmanship? First Wuk's eyebrows rose slightly. Feng Qianli was clearly trying to court death with him. A mere half-step sword emperor wanted to compete with him. A true sword emperor? You're not qualified. Shou Wuk didn't have the slightest interest. If he fought with Qin Hao, perhaps his sword would be excited. I know I can't beat you if I go all out, but if I suppress my emperor will and only fight with my sword intent, I'm afraid you can't do anything to me. And if you fight with me, you won't bully me just because you're at a higher cultivation level, right? Feng Qinli said. Since they were at the same cultivation realm, Shao Qian would only use his sword Dao nomological laws to attack. Even if First Flawless was one step ahead and possessed two types of laws, Shao Qian would not fear him. And only in this way could he stand out even more after he won. In this way, Shouwuk wouldn't have the face to fight for the position of the chief disciple, and the Scorpio Divine Soldier would be Feng Qianli's. Do you really want to be beaten? Shouwuk stared at Feng Qianli. Then, he took a step forward. The sound of a sword clanging faintly spread, piercing through the air. It's not certain who will be beaten who. Show me your sword, Feng Qianli said. Suddenly, there was an incomparably dazzling sword light blooming from his body. He waved his hand, and rays of sharp sword chi surrounded his body, swallowing and spitting out cold light. I don't even need to use my sword spirit to fight you. I don't even need rules. Shouwuk took a step forward. His body soared into the air, and with a wave of his hand, a ray of sword chi pierced out from his palm. This ray of sword chi seemed to have condensed into a solid substance. It fell from the sky with a sharp ray of light, as if ignoring space. It was so fast that it couldn't be seen. Before the sound of the sword could spread, the ray of light had already pierced Feng Qianli's head. You're really arrogant, Feng Qianli said coldly, ignoring the sharp sword that was descending from above his head. After all, Shouwuk didn't use rules for this sword. He didn't even open the sword Calamity Lotus Soul. He also suppressed the Emperor's will, and it was just the most ordinary ray of sword chi. But did he want to use this to defeat the successor of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor? Was he looking down on Feng Qianli, or was he confident in his own strength? Clang! The sword pierced down from above, but it seemed to be blocked by space. A surge of earth chi gushed out from Feng Qianli's body, shattering Shouwuk's sword chi. Then, he raised his hand and pointed to the air. Go! Swoosh! 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 The sharp swords around him flashed and turned into a rain of swords. They rushed to the sky and swept toward Shouwuk. Like his opponent, it was just pure sword chi. Feng Qianli had his own pride. Ha ha! Shouwuk smiled. He reached out his hand and grabbed at the void. The space trembled, and endless spirit chi twisted, forming a twisting vortex that swallowed all the sword chi that swept over. Bang! As Shouwuk clenched his fist, the vortex exploded, and the sword chi inside shattered. Get out of the way, get out of the way. Don't be affected. Seeing this, Yi Xuehan stepped out and waved at the disciples nearby. He raised his head and winked at Shouwuk secretly. This way, I won't be afraid of accidentally hurting others. In the air, Shouwuk smiled faintly. Pretentious. Feng Qianli waved his hand. He raised his hand, and a burst of sword will power surged into the void. It was as if his will had taken over the sky of the training hall. His sword will filled the air. Immediately, a bright sword matrix pattern was born. It spread out in the void and pressed down on Shouwuk's head. Countless sword lights were born in the sword matrix. They were so dense that they covered the sky like fish scales. They all fell toward Shouwuk. The sword lights pierced through the space, making sharp noises. Each sword seemed to be Feng Qianli's real body, and it was obvious that they contained his will of the sword. This method of gathering will into a sword matrix was naturally an exquisite method of the Daozong Peak. It was an extraordinary emperor's method. Flashy but not practical. Shouwuk shook his head and said. There seemed to be two flames flickering in the depths of his eyes. A burst of flame will power swept out and filled the void. Suddenly, the temperature rose sharply. It turned into a sea of fire that burned the sky and covered the sky. Feng Qianli was a little surprised. Flames? Since when did Shou Wuk know how to play with fire? Not only him, but many disciples of the Daozong Peak also looked at the fire in the sky. The sea of fire rolled and turned into a curtain of fire that seemed to be able to burn everything. This flame will power was definitely not to be underestimated. It was very powerful. However, this had nothing to do with sword will. There was no shadow of a sword at all. It was more like the will power of a fire elemental soul essence genius. Shou Wuk was a pure sword cultivator. Other than the sword, he didn't seem to have touched anything else. Why did he understand fire now? Chapter 15:21. Above the training ground, a huge sword diagram shrouded the sky and the earth, pressing down on Shou Wuk's head. Within the sword diagram, a hazy figure stood tall, like the figure of Feng Qianli, filled with Ren Huang's sword will. His sword will was integrated into the sword diagram, resonating with heaven and earth, as if his will could turn into tens of thousands of swords to destroy everything, killing Shou Wuk within. However, Jiu Wuk did not release his own sword will to fight against it. Instead, a powerful will of the Way of Flames swept out. With him as the center, the torrential flames formed a raging sea of fire, blocking the sky and the sword diagram. This scene surprised many of the disciples of Daozong Peak. Shou Wuk cultivated the power of fire? If I remember correctly, this disciple of yours should be a pure swordsman. Migres looked at the two in the air. He had some impressions of the outstanding direct disciples of Daozong Peak. In particular, Shou Wuk and Xiao Han were the most talented disciples of this year. When he joined Daozong Peak, he was a pure swordsman, but in the past 3 years, I am not sure if Wuk has learned other methods. Lord Daozong was also puzzled. Daozong Peak had thousands of methods, including all the martial arts in the world, so it was normal for Shou Wuk to have cultivated other method. The unique techniques of the Divine Palace were so tempting that even the purest swordsman could not resist the temptation after a long time, gradually becoming impure. Moreover, no one said that Shou Wuk only had one primordial soul. Perhaps there was another primordial soul hidden in his body, and it happened to be of the fire element, so he cultivated fire spells. Everyone was just a little surprised, but they did not think there was anything wrong. Shou Wuk seemed to have sensed something strange below. His expression changed slightly, and a will swept out, suddenly gathering the fire into a sword. In the rolling sea of fire, the tongues of fire all condensed into flame swords. In the blink of an eye, countless flame swords lined up, hanging upside down in the sky, pointing at the huge sword diagram in the void. Go! Shou Wuk raised his hand and shouted. The flame swords broke through the air, stabbing forward in front of the sword diagram, like countless fire dragons soaring in the sky. Slash! Feng Qianli's expression was cold. He activated the sword diagram with his will, and 10,000 swords flew together. Numerous fierce swords slashed down. At the same time, countless flaming swords rose into the sky and collided violently. Waves of shattering sounds exploded out, and it was too much for the eyes to take in. If I don't use the rules and can't expose my source soul, it will be a little troublesome to suppress Feng Qianli. Shou Wuk saw that although his flaming sword was fierce, its sharpness was somewhat inferior to Feng Qianli's. In the blink of an eye, the sword diagram pressed down on the sea of fire, showing signs of crushing and piercing through the sea of fire. This was not because he was weak, but because Shou Wuk's sword essence was not as good as Feng Qianli's. He had lost because his understanding of the sword Dao was too shallow. Of course, if the real Shou Wuk was here, this would never happen. Unfortunately, he was an impostor. Your sword Dao is only SOSO. Feng Qianli stood in the dojo and activated the sword diagram with his will, constantly pressing down on the sea of fire. Many sword auras fell into the sea of fire, piercing through and tearing it apart, weakening Shou Wuk's flame will. If this continued, Showuk's flames would not be able to hold on for long and would be broken by the sword diagram. When Feng Qianli suppressed his realm and did not use the Emperor's will, he was indeed no match for him. A trace of excitement appeared in Feng Qianli's heart. Senior Brother Wuk's sword will is being suppressed. Many disciples of Daozong Peak were surprised. When it came to sword Dao, Showuk had always been ranked first in their hearts. Xiantian Peak's 10,000 Swords Empyrean Peak was so shocking that every one of them could be called an unparalleled sword. Even Feng Qianli, who came from the Juying Sword Palace in the East State, was still inferior to Showuk in terms of talent in sword Dao. Why was he being suppressed today? Boom! While the disciples were puzzled, a loud sound came from the void. The sea of flames was swallowed up by the 10,000 swords and completely shattered. The flames dissipated, leaving only the sharp sword light that pierced through and continued to fall towards Showuk. "Admit defeat and I'll leave you with some dignity," Feng Qianli said. At this moment, his confidence was growing. His sword was too strong. He was already 100% confident that he could defeat Showuk. "Let's talk about it later if I can save my dignity." Showuk's body technique flashed wildly, ethereal, and ghostly. He weaved through the 10,000 swords. Although he was locked on by his opponent's will, he could not be hit. This extremely elegant body technique lit up the eyes of many Daozong Peak disciples. They were amazed. Not only is Senior Brother Wuk's sword will unparalleled, even his fire control technique and body technique are so perfect. It's really amazing. Senior Brother Wuk said that he won't use the rules. Could it be that he's afraid that the rules sword will be too strong and Senior Brother Qianli might not be able to withstand a single strike? Is that why he deliberately used other martial arts to practice? The disciples of Daozong Peak looked at each other and nodded. That was very likely. After all, according to the momentum of the 10,000 Swords Empyrean, Feng Qianli might not even be able to withstand a single strand of the rules sword will. The power was really too strong. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Feng Qianli's sharp eyes swept across the people who spoke. He was the dignified successor of the Juying Sword Emperor. Could it be that he could not even withstand a single strike from someone else? Could it be that Showuk also had the same thought in his heart, so he did not use the rules of the sword? This was really too humiliating. Hurricane break. With a roar, the sword will on Feng Qianli's body surged even more violently. Countless sword lights spewed out and rushed into the void above. They reflected each other's brilliance and intertwined into a sword net to surround him. He wanted to see if Showuk's ghostly footwork could really dodge it. It's time to get serious. Showuk looked at the sword chi that was coming for him. It was simply airtight. He could not dodge it and could only face it head-on. However, he was not very good at sword Dao. He was good at alchemy. Red Lotus, forget it, I can't use my Yuan spirit. Qin Hao, who was disguised as Showuk, was helpless. Once he released his Yuan spirit, his true identity would be exposed. Now was not the time to do so. He had to try his best to stall for time. However, if he lost, he was afraid that he would lose face as the successor of the Southern Region Sword Emperor. 9 Palace War Emperor Art, open for me. Qin Hao clenched his right fist and a dazzling golden light burst out from his body. Visible to the naked eye, the meridians on his body lit up. It was as if golden lines were gathering in the palm of his hand. Those meridians contained an extremely violent power. Bang, 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 bang. Golden light constantly penetrated the palaces of his feet, knees, waist, heart, and shoulders. It was as if a gate of primitive power had been opened. Waves of domineering power flowed through his body and finally gathered in his fist. When the right fist palace was opened, Qin Hao's physical strength had reached an extremely terrifying level even without using the power of the dragon soul. Then, he raised his fist and punched downward. The fist radiance rushed towards the sword chi hurricane. The dazzling golden light formed a heavenly fist force that smashed into the sword chi hurricane like a mountain. Boom! The sword chi was shattered and the hurricane was scattered by the fist. At this moment, Feng Qianli, who was in the training hall, seemed to have been hit in the chest by a hammer. He took 2 steps back and blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. There was a look of disbelief in his eyes. There was no sword intent, only fist force. Showuk suppressed his realm and did not even use the rules. Yet, he was able to shatter his sword chi hurricane. Even his physical strength was so terrifying? Mizar Hall's Emperor Art. Daozong looked at Mizar War Reverend. How could there be such a good thing? He was secretly teaching his disciple a top Emperor Art? Why are you looking at me? I don't know anything. Mizar War Reverend was puzzled. When did Showuk learn to fight with Dilly? Other than the personal disciples of his peak and Qin Hao, no one from the other 5 peaks should know. Who taught him? It is said that before Qin Hao and Showuk came to the Divine Palace, they accidentally learned the 9 Palace War Emperor Art in the Diluo Bay ruins. Not only them, but Zhou Wudao and Jing Qinqi also know it. My peak, Xiaogua, also knows it. The Xiantian deity lord said. She knew it from Tian, Quebec. When Qin Hao learned to cast weapons at Xiantian Peak, he used the battle with Dilly. No wonder. Mizar War Reverend snorted. Zhou Wudao and Jing Qinqi knew it too. They must have communicated with Showuk in private. After all, they were all disciples of Daozong Peak. However, thinking about it made him angry. This was the Mizar Hall's ultimate art. Now, all the 7 peaks knew it and it was a common technique. He did not know which ancestor left it in the ruins. It was a misfortune. Your physical body is so ferocious. Feng Qianli looked up. Showuk was wrapped in the golden light of the Great Path. It gave him a lot of pressure. I'm stronger in other areas. Do you want to try? Qin Hao shouted. He reached out his palm and swallowed the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. He gathered primordial fire with the power of the War Emperor and blasted out a huge flaming sword qi. Sword qi surged like a giant flaming sword smashing down, slashing into the dojo, burying Feng Qianli's entire body. However, this sword did not have any power. As the flames spread, the ground of the training ground was not damaged at all. Feng Qianli was also unharmed. However, he stood still like a statue. He stood there without moving. His empty eyes were wide open. It was as if his consciousness had been pulled away and entered another space. Sword Realm Field. Migres cried out in surprise. Showuk used the way of the Sword Realm to trap Feng Qianli's consciousness. If the Sword Realm was not broken, Feng Qianli would not be able to escape. However, at the same time, Showuk was also trapped in the Sword Realm. This was a trick of the saint level. As one's cultivation deepened, the spiritual energy of the martial artist would reach a certain level. It would be very difficult to use this way to trap the consciousness of others. Moreover, there was a danger of damaging one's soul. However, no one expected that Showuk would commit such a big taboo and play such a small trick. However, Tian Quan did not know that Qin Hao was also forced to do this because he was not the real Showuk. Just as the peak venerables and disciples were discussing, Feng Qianli was facing his doom in the realm. Blazing Fire Sword Realm. Feng Qianli looked around. There was no training ground or any figure. There was only endless fire. This was a flame realm formed by a martial artist's spiritual energy. Opposite him, Showuk was walking towards him step by step. There was still no trace of sword intent. His entire body was burning with fire. He had completely turned into a body of flames. Ha ha! You're playing Realm Field with me. Feng Qianli did not notice anything unusual. He just wanted to laugh. This was a child's trick, a trick that saint-level martial artists often used. When one's cultivation reached the emperor level, he could break it with a thought. Had Showuk, who was known to be unparalleled in the way of the sword, been forced to such a state by his superb swordsmanship? Keep laughing. You'll cry soon, Qin Hao said coldly. He was extremely calm in his own realm field. After all, as long as the realm field was not broken, no matter what happened here, the outside world would not know. Chapter 1522. Endless raging flames burned. In the space, heavenly fire occasionally fell from the void. Countless rivers of magma flowed on the ground, crisscrossing. The ground cracked open, and flames rolled up from the ravines. The world was crimson, like a purgatory of flames. Even so, there was no fear on Feng Qianli's face. His gaze was sharp to the extreme. Not to mention suppressing his cultivation level, even if Head Wu Kei unleashed his full cultivation and condensed his emperor will into a sword domain, Feng Qianli wouldn't be trapped here. After all, he had also touched the threshold of the emperor realm, half-step sword emperor. Qin Hao walked over step by step. On his body, the color of the flames became darker and thicker, like burning sticky blood. The whole world began to turn red, and the scene became even more terrifying. It was as if they had fallen into a demon's den. Feng Qianli's heart skipped a beat. He felt that something was wrong. The pressure from the opposite side was getting stronger. Although the artistic conception space was formed by the will of a martial artist, it was still a martial artist's power. The aura in this space was like that of a demon god. It was completely different from Shou Wu's temperament. It was like another person. It was strange, but also faintly familiar. Kill. Feng Qianli moved. He did not have time to think. His palm formed a sword seal, and the sword aura around his body whistled. A turbulent sword light slashed forward. You want to compete with swords? I'll satisfy you. Red Lotus exploding flame blade. Qin Hao let go of his hands and feet. The origin spirit in his body shook, and the powerful Red Lotus overlord fire spewed out, condensing into a giant flaming sword. The demonic flames on the sword surged and slashed forward, cutting open the space. The blood-red demonic flames raged, and the violent power was completely different from the outside world. After all, Qin Hao could not use his soul power in front of so many people. But now, he could use it to his heart's content. Boom! The sword aura shattered, and Feng Qianli was sent flying. A heat wave hit his body, and the terrible burning power soaked his body, making him groan. At this moment, an incomparably bright light burst out. He turned his body with the sword aura and forcefully dispersed the Red Lotus overlord fire chi. His expression changed wildly. You are not Shou Wu. Such a terrifying flame was able to destroy his half-step sword emperor's sword chi with just a wisp of soul power. Not many people in the Divine Palace could do this. The blood-colored devil flame was especially eye-catching. In all of the 7 peaks, there was only one person who possessed such a strange flame. Migres Palace's Qin Hao. You still recognized me, but it doesn't matter. Wuk has other things to do. I'll fight you on his behalf. Qin Hao chuckled. The Red Lotus fire was too prominent. Once he made a move, he would definitely be recognized. Are you crazy? I have never thought of fighting you. My opponent is Shou Wu. Feng Qianli roared. He did not know why Qin Hao was pretending to be Shou Wu. However, there was one thing that he was absolutely no match for Qin Hao. This person could be said to be invincible in the same realm. It's all the same, all the same. Come on, come on. Qin Hao did not care about anything else. With his hands behind his back, he stepped into the void and stepped on Feng Qianli's head. With this step, the void trembled as if it could shatter the great path of heaven and earth. It was a high-level emperor-level martial technique, the water-wind godly step. When one's cultivation was low, this step was not offensive and could only be used to avoid danger. After reaching a certain level, one could use the power of the step to combine with one's own martial technique to achieve extraordinary results. Once one reached the emperor level and used the godly steps, the earth-shattering power of the step could crush the heavens and shatter a martial artist's soul. Whether it was fighting or escaping, the power was extremely strong. Qin Hao's step landed and the void rumbled. The bottom of his foot contained an extremely strong power of the great path that suppressed downward. It was like a demonic mountain was pressing down on Feng Qianli's head. Feng Qianli's eyes widened as he felt the huge power coming from above his head. Even his soul was trembling. He put his hands together and stabbed upward. A 3-meter-long sword light shot out from his palms and collided with the suppressing power. Suddenly, a muffled sound was heard and the sword light was crushed. Feng Qianli felt the blood in his abdomen churning. He wanted to spit out a mouthful of blood as his body fell rapidly. This power was too strong. Dong. Qin Hao took another step, ignoring the distance between them. After all, this world was formed by his will. His will caused the step to land on top of Feng Qianli's head. This step pierced through the void and shattered the sky. It was so loud that Feng Qianli's eardrums were about to burst. He could no longer hold back the blood in his mouth. He opened his mouth and spat it forward. His body felt like it was being crushed, and his aura fluctuated greatly. Qin Hao, stop. I don't want to fight with you. You don't want to be the chief disciple of Daozong Peak anymore? What does it have to do with you? Of course it has to do with me. If you can't get past me, you won't be the chief disciple of Daozong Peak anymore. Don't be too arrogant. Your artistic conception can't trap me. If I expose it, you won't have it easy either, Feng Qianli roared. He didn't know why Qin Hao pretended to be Showuk, but there must be a big secret. However, the battle of the chief disciple of Daozong Peak had nothing to do with Migre's palace. If Qin Hao's identity was exposed, how would he explain it to old man Daozong? Can't trap you, Qin Hao sneered. Try it. You're going too far. Feng Qianli raised his head and roared. On his body, a bright light was released. A great Dao Rule sword intent flowed, and sword qi flashed continuously. It was sharp and dazzling, as if it could break open the sky. Waves of terrifying sword light were formed and integrated with Feng Qianli's rule power. He didn't believe that he couldn't break Qin Hao's artistic conception. After all, in a situation where they were at the same level, the difference in their soul power wasn't big. As long as one's will was firm, he wouldn't be trapped in his opponent's artistic conception and be unable to escape. With his half-step sword sovereign-level rule power, even Showuk, who had stepped into the martial emperor level, couldn't trap him in his artistic conception, let alone Qin Hao, who had yet to step into the martial emperor level. One sword light chilling 3,000 miles. Feng Qianli roared. His long hair danced in the wind, and endless sword qi rushed towards the sky from his position. Just one sword qi was enough to pierce through space. When the space collapsed, he would report to the Peak Venerables that Qin Hao dared to impersonate Showuk and played with him. He would definitely be punished by the Peak Venerables. He would make Qin Hao kneel and beg for mercy. He would make Qin Hao too ashamed to face the people of the Seven Peaks. It's good to be young. Qin Hao looked at the struggling Feng Qianli. The ignorant were truly fearless. How could his raging flames intent be broken by a half-step sword sovereign so easily? That's right. The difference in their levels wasn't big. Even if he was weaker than the other party, as long as his will was firm enough, he wouldn't be unable to break free from his consciousness. Unfortunately, the difference in their soul power was too big. Dong. As the fleet-foot steps stomped down, the heaven and earth shook. The power that spread out in the void shattered countless sword qi. Even if there were a few sword qi that flew towards the sky, it didn't cause any ripples in the blood-red void. How can this be? Feng Qianli's eyes widened in shock. He actually couldn't shake this space? He was a half-step sword sovereign and had comprehended the laws. Not to mention that he was in the same realm as Qin Hao. Even if a true Dharch used a consciousness seal, it wouldn't be able to cause any ripples. How tyrannical was Qin Hao's will? How powerful was his soul? Do you understand now? Qin Hao looked down with pity. Although Feng Qianli was a little disgusting, he was still a force to be reckoned with in this turbulent undercurrent. It was time to let him understand everything. But before that, it was better to beat him up. In the Uni Peaks dojo, countless gazes were on the two people in the dojo. Shou Wuck and Feng Qianli were both sword geniuses. Now, they were engaged in a battle of intent to compete for the position of the chief disciple of Daozong Peak. For the sake of fairness, if Shou Wuck didn't use his emperor's intent and didn't use the laws, who would win in the end? Time passed by slowly. Shou Wuck stood with his eyes closed. His long hair fluttered gently, and from time to time, his body would tremble with flames. However, his aura was stable. It was obvious that he was in a relaxed state. Feng Qianli was different. His face was distorted, and some of his expressions were very exaggerated, giving off an indecent feeling. And as time passed, his aura became more and more restless. At first, his sword intent was still very strong, but gradually, his aura began to weaken rapidly. Fist marks appeared on his face one after another, and his hair also started to burn under an inexplicable force. Boom! Finally, an explosion sounded. Feng Qianli's standing posture was as if he was hit by a wild beast. He flew backward fiercely, and his clothes burst open on the spot. His body bent into the shape of a bow and fell to the edge of the dojo, knocking out a disciple who couldn't dodge in time. A mouthful of blood sprayed on the ground. The successor of the East Continent's Jueying Sword Emperor no longer had the noble appearance of a sword cultivator. At this moment, his face was extremely pale, and his eyes finally opened, revealing sadness. "You let me win." Qin Hao, who was pretending to be Shou Wuck, cupped his fists and chuckled. At this moment, in the depths of Feng Qianli's desolate eyes, there was great fear spreading. His feelings were incomparably complicated. There was both shame and anger, and also a bellyful of anger. If Qin Hao hadn't told him the truth, he absolutely wouldn't have been able to endure this. However, in the face of unknown danger, the successor of the Jueying Sword Emperor finally chose to put aside his personal grievances. He reacted quickly enough and got up. He cupped his fists and sighed. "I admit defeat. Shou Wuck deserves to be the real #1 swordsman. I withdraw from the position of the chief disciple of the Daozong Peak." Chief disciple? Feng Qianli didn't care about the chief disciple anymore. He just wanted to leave alive. Although he had been beaten up miserably by Qin Hao in the state, he had only lost to Qin Hao and not to the Southern Domain's first disciple, Wu Quebec. Thus, he did not feel that there was anything embarrassing about it. His sword was still very strong. He lost so quickly. Look at the injury on senior brother Qianli's face. There isn't a trace of sword intent. It looks more like a punch. Senior brother Wuck really kept his promise. I really want to enter the state of mind and see senior brother Wuck's fist technique. Many disciples of the Daozong Peak said with admiration. Shou Wuck was not only unparalleled in the way of the sword, but also in the way of the Tao of Flames, his movement techniques, and even his fists. The disciples of the Daozong Peak used to think that he was cold and arrogant. Now it seemed that he was just keeping a low profile. Hearing the discussions around him, Feng Qianli was driven mad. How was it Shou Wuck? It was clearly Qin Hao, that bastard, who beat him up. He had punched him thousands of times. It's precious to know your own limits. Since that's the case, which disciple of my peak wants to exchange a few moves with Wuck? Daozong looked down and felt very gratified. He also wanted Shou Wuck and Xiao Han to inherit the position of chief disciple and second chief disciple of the Daozong Peak. Everyone, please advise me. Qin Hao imitated Shou Wuck's usual movements. His eyes scanned the surroundings without the slightest ripple, giving off an aloof feeling. Chapter 1523. The disciples of Daozong Peak looked at each other, but no one was willing to step forward. Feng Qianli was a disciple of the Zhuiying Sword Emperor of the East Continent, and his swordsmanship was extremely strong. After coming to the Divine Palace, he became a direct disciple and was personally taught by the Peak Master. His cultivation had reached the level of a half-step sword emperor, and he had mastered the rules of swordsmanship. There were only a few people on Daozong Peak who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him, and there were only one or two who were better than him. It just so happened that Shou Wuck was better than Feng Qianli. Now that Feng Qianli had been defeated, no one dared to step forward. "We are convinced," the disciples replied. Lord Daozong nodded. "From today onwards, Wuck will be one of the peak seats of our peak. He will inherit the spirit of the peak and be a role model for all disciples. His will is my will." There was still a huge difference between a chief disciple and a direct disciple. It was equivalent to the chief disciple of a sect's cabinet in the outside world. They were the successors of the sect leader, and they represented the absolute will of the sect. There were 2 peak seats, and Shou Wuck only took one. As for whether he would be the chief disciple or the chief disciple, it was an internal matter of Daozong Peak. After returning to the peak, it would be judged by Lord Daozong and the elders. Qin Hao walked to the side of the platform with an indifferent expression and stood beside the former chief disciple, Xinghua. From now on, he was a symbol of Daozong Peak, and a role model for all disciples. He looked across and made eye contact with Qin Hao beside Eastern Sky. The corners of their lips curled up in tacit understanding. Although their temperaments were different, no one could imagine that they were the same person. Feng Qianli glanced at Qin Hao. Although he knew that Shou Wuck was in disguise, he still felt uncomfortable standing next to Xinghua. The 2 most outstanding people of the 2 peaks were standing side by side, and they were being looked at with respect by all the disciples. If this was not an illusion, he would never give up that position. "Xiao Han of Daozong Peak, please enlighten me." At this moment, Xiao Han stepped out and faced the people in the training hall. Her body was surrounded by platinum flames, and a dazzling crown appeared on her head. The aura of a holy and inviolable empress spread out, majestic and awe-inspiring. It was as if she was an empress leading an army into battle. She was so valiant that no one dared to look at her directly. The disciples of Daozong Peak instinctively retreated. Even a Ren Huang would find it difficult to withstand the pressure of this imperial aura. "Please enlighten me," Xiao Han shouted again. His emperor's qi swept out, and his heroic spirit was overbearing. It actually caused the vast training ground to become silent, and no one dared to challenge him. "Senior sister Xiao Han's talent is unparalleled. We are all sincerely convinced," the disciples of Daozong Peak said in unison. Xiao Han's cultivation was no weaker than Shou Wuck's at all. In fact, he might even be stronger. Not to mention her source spirit, just her emperor realm was enough to make people not dare to fight her. "Little girl, ha ha." On the platform, Migres laughed and looked at Daozong. "A little girl has scared all the disciples of your peak away. Is there no one else in your sect?" "Yi Shuihan, Zhou Wudao, Qian Ning, Jing Qinqi." Daozong called out some names. It was just a spar. If they lost, they lost. They did not have the courage to fight. In the training hall, Yi Shuihan, Fairy Qian Ning, Jing Qinqi, and the others were all silent. It was obvious that they did not intend to compete with Xiao Han. Even Zhou Wudao, who was usually arrogant and domineering, stood in place and laughed foolishly. Xiao Han has stepped into the Emperor realm, and her realm is already ahead of everyone else. In particular, her spiritual control of her source spirit is very strong. "I'm afraid no one will compete with her," Yaoguang Fairy said. The other peak venerables nodded. There were only a few outstanding disciples in each peak. With Xiao Han's ability, even among the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, there were not many direct disciples who could defeat her. Daozong Peak's Shou Wuk had the strength to fight her. The rest were Migres Palace's Qin Hao, Yaoguang Peak's Qingji Han, and Uni Peak's Ning Tianxing. However, within Daozong Peak, Shou Wuk had already obtained the qualification to take a peak seat. Even if the others competed, they would not be Xiao Han's match. Xiao Han has been promoted to the peak seat. Daozong shouted. Thank you for letting me win. Xiao Han turned and walked to Shou Wuk's side. She had won without a fight. In Yaoguang Peak's team, Qingji Han's pupils contracted slightly. Her gaze fell on Xiao Han. She had won without a fight and stepped onto the peak seat? Unfortunately, she was not from Daozong Peak. Otherwise, Xiao Han would not be so relaxed. Dong. A figure stepped out from Uni Peak's team. As his footsteps landed, a layer of majestic Emperor Qi shook the soles of his feet. It was as if he was born with the Emperor Qi, suppressing all things and making heaven and earth submit to him. This was Ning Tianxing. Uni Peak can only have one peak seat. Come at me together. Ning Tianxing stared at all the Uni Peak disciples opposite her. She was going to fight against the entire peak with her own strength. Her tone could not be described as not arrogant. Even though Uni Peak's disciples were much fewer than the other peaks, there were still about 30 of them. To be able to persist from the beginning to the end and step onto the Divine Palace, which one of them was not outstanding? And Ning Tianxing was undoubtedly looking down on them by asking all of them to attack together. How arrogant! A disciple of Mizang Peak said. Shut up, it's not like we're fighting him. Although he's arrogant, Ning Tianxing is indeed an extraordinary person. The disciples of the other 5 peaks looked at the battle. At this moment, the training hall had clearly entered into a fierce competition for the chief disciple of each peak. The individual battles were silently paused. Almost everyone was looking at the Uni Peak disciples. They were openly challenged by one person, so they must not feel good. What's more, Ning Tianxing's words were also incomparably domineering. Only one peak seat could exist in the entire Uni Peak. Was he referring to himself? Dong. A Uni Peak disciple stepped out. Dong. The second. Dong. The third. The fourth. One figure after another stepped out, forming an indestructible formation. Obviously, this group of disciples could not stand Ning Tianxing's behavior and were preparing to join forces to resist. No matter how talented you are, you should not look down on us like this. It's really infuriating. Please enlighten us. A Uni Peak disciple with an outstanding temperament stood in front of the formation. A writing brush appeared in his hand, and he quickly drew in the void. Huge beasts, terrifying birds, and giants were constantly outlined by this disciple's brush. They were vivid and lifelike, as if they were made of flesh and blood. The vast and boundless team was like a majestic army, bombarding Ning Tianxing. At the same time, all the Uni Peak disciples released their essence souls and formed a soul power formation. The power of the formation continuously gathered on the person at the front, enhancing his ability. None of them had entered the Emperor realm, and none of them had even comprehended the laws in the half-step Emperor realm. They knew very well how terrifying an Emperor realm powerhouse was. Even so, they would not allow others to belittle them. The army trampled on the training hall as if they were trampling on the heavens. They surged towards Ning Tianxing and engulfed him. Ning Tianxing did not say a word. Perhaps he was disdainful of them. He sat on the ground, facing the vast army. His Guqin spirit condensed and his hands fell between the strings. His entire temperament changed drastically, becoming as noble as an emperor. Hum! A powerful Guqin sound swept forward, breaking through the sky, rolling and spreading. It was like a large net of sound waves falling from the sky, suppressing everything in the training hall as it fell towards the head of the vast army. Musical formation. Mo Xian's dark eyes shot out a ray of light, as if piercing into Ning Tianqing's technique. He was also a guqin cultivator, and his musical techniques were extraordinary. Naturally, he could see a thing or two from the other party's guqin intent. In all honesty, this person's guqin technique was extremely strong. It was just a strand of music, but Ning Tianqing seemed to dominate the great Tao of the heavens. At this moment, Mo Xian realized that there was a gap between his guqin technique and Ning Tianqing's. What's more, the other party's music could form a formation with his own intent. There were probably not many people in the world with such ability. Chang Hello was also listening with his eyes closed. It was as if his soul was pouncing on Ning Tianqing's strings, becoming one with the guqin. Even though it was just a sound wave vibration, he could completely feel the power of the other parties while contained in the music. Just as Mo Xian had admitted, the other party was extremely strong. I thought that I was the best in music in the southern region, but I didn't realize that the successor of the Ning family's third branch is even better than me. Chang Hello closed his eyes and smiled inwardly. No emotion could be heard from his voice. Ning Tianqing had hidden himself well, living in seclusion deep in the mountains and forests of the great Ding Duchy. He had never had any achievements that attracted the attention of the world. However, when he made a move, it was so shocking. If it had been in the past, Chang Hello might have been jealous and ignited with jealousy, igniting the desire to compete. But now, seeing someone more outstanding than him again, he was surprisingly calm. This was probably Shou Wu's state of mind when he saw Qin Hao at the Golden Light City auction house. Was it so difficult to admit that someone was better than him? In the past, Chang Hello thought that it was very difficult. He couldn't tolerate someone more outstanding. He wanted to be the strongest and reach the peak. But now, he had learned to appreciate. Yao Guang had taught him to appreciate. Perhaps appreciation itself was a kind of cultivation. Buzz. A layer of platinum light surrounded Chang Hello's body. As Ning Tianqing's guqin music spread, a kind of law condensed within his will and integrated into his spirit. Controlling the laws, half-step Yuan Emperor. Chang Hello had broken through the limits of the Emperor realm. On the other side, Ning Tianqing's guqin music continued to spread, each wave more turbulent than the last. Finally, under the bombardment of his musical array, the array formed by all the disciples of the Uni Peak shattered with a loud bang. The array was forcibly destroyed, and countless bodies were sent flying diagonally by the sound of the guqin and fell to the edge of the training hall. He had single-handedly defeated an entire peak. With a wave of his hand, Ning Tianqing's guqin spirit disappeared. He stood up and glanced at his fellow disciples who had fallen to the ground. He didn't say a word, turned around, and walked toward the platform, standing among the chief disciples. At this time, silence spoke louder than words. Damn it! A disciple of the Uni Peak who had fallen to the ground slammed his fist on the ground, his eyes filled with anger. His musical array is too strong. He didn't even release his emperor intent and laws, but we couldn't hold on. Although I don't want to admit it, I have to admit that he's on a different level from us. Another injured disciple of the Uni Peak sighed. What was a genius? It was only relative. In the outside world, each of them had crushed many of their peers. But in the Divine Palace, there were stronger people who could easily sweep them away. I'm the chief disciple of my peak, Ning Tianqing. On the platform, perfected Lord Uni laughed loudly. Ning Tianqing's style was a little cold, but his talent was impeccable. It was normal that he was a little arrogant. Congratulations, junior apprentice brother Ning. The previous chief disciple of the Daozong Peak, a middle-aged Taoist, congratulated him. Ning Tianqing didn't look at the Taoist. His gaze moved and fell on Qin Hao, who was beside Eastern Sky. His expression was as calm as ever, as if he was looking at the disciples he had defeated. The chief disciple of the Migrez Hall? Now, He was also the chief disciple of the Uni Peak. Chapter 1524. What do you think he's thinking? On the right side of the platform, Qin Hao, who was pretending to be Shou Wuk, secretly sent a message to Xiaohan. He was now standing right across from Ning Tianqing, who was on the left side of the platform. He could clearly see Ning Tianqing's expression. www.org. Who cares what he's thinking? Xiaohan raised her eyes and looked forward. Crown Prince Ning Wu's calm expression contained a strong sense of challenge. He had the urge to fight Qin Hao. Xiaohan didn't care about these things. She was more curious about what method Qin Hao had used to split himself into two. The doppelganger had become the flawless head. She knew that the Qin Hao beside her was the real body. As for the one beside Eastern Sky, she did not understand much, but it was definitely not a simple doppelganger technique. That body was full of energy and had vivid features. It was no different from a real person. The 6 Nirvana stage peak venerables did not notice it at all. Besides, she was more worried about how to leave this place safely with Qin Hao. Brother Qin Hao, I'm a little scared. Xiaohan reached out her hand. She realized that Qin Hao was maintaining the appearance of Shou Wuk and withdrew her hand. Don't worry. Trust in Wuk's ability. Qin Hao replied secretly, but he was not confident in his heart. He could split into two and become two living beings. Naturally, he could not do without the help of the dragon spirit Dharma power. However, the Dharma power could not be maintained for long. It depended on how fast Shou Wuk could move and whether he could complete the task Qin Hao had entrusted to him before the Dharma power disappeared. If the Dharma power was accidentally exposed during this period, he could only sigh and sigh. Man proposes, God disposes. Qin Hao was worried. His thoughts were all on Shou Wuk. His success or failure would affect everyone's life and death. In the training hall, the battle for the chief disciple of each peak was still going on fiercely. The 2 candidates for Daozong Peak were confirmed. They were Shou Wuk and Xiaohan. Ning Tianqing swept away all the disciples of the Uni Peak and became the only peak seat. As for the Migres Palace, Qin Hao did not need to compete with others, so he summoned the Dharma idol to confuse the crowd. After all, the Dharma idol did not need to fight fiercely with others, so its spiritual energy would not be consumed as quickly and could be maintained for a longer time. Next, there were only the Alcade, Supreme Micro, Black Heaven, and Mizar peaks left. www.org. After Ning Tianqing won, the first princess of the East Continent, Qingji Han, stepped out from the direction of the Yaoguang Peak. She stood in the center of the training ground and stared coldly at the entire Yaoguang Peak team. She said, "Go ahead." In an instant, the training hall fell silent. The hearts of the disciples of the 7 peaks trembled slightly. There was no limit to the number of challengers and no rejection. Did Qingji Han also want to challenge a peak? But the Yaoguang Peak was not the Uni Peak. They had many disciples. In the Divine Palace, besides the Daozong Peak, the Yaoguang Peak and Mizar Peak had the most disciples. They had many geniuses and 3 or 4 direct disciples. Qingji Han was worthy of being the successor of Empress Lingxian of the East Continent. She was really ambitious, but it was not difficult to see that she was very confident in herself. In an instant, all eyes were focused on the Yaoguang Peak team. In the face of Qingji Han's challenge, hundreds of Yaoguang Peak disciples did not know who would have the courage to accept. At the front of the team, Mo Xian did not move. As a prince of an empire under Daqin, he naturally would not compete with Qingji Han for the position of chief disciple. Guden, whose soul had taken over Su Jin's body, also did not move. He stood there with a wooden face. Even though he had awakened the power of 2 souls and his cultivation had increased greatly, he did not intend to make a move. In the silent dojo, all the disciples of the Yaoguang Peak were unusually quiet. No one dared to move forward. They were completely intimidated by the aura of the first princess of the East Continent. Several peak masters looked at each other and smiled. Another female emperor. Previously, Xiao Han had suppressed the disciples of the Daozong Peak and made them not dare to make a move. Qingji Han was the same. It seemed that the two most outstanding girls were intentionally competing with each other. Even so, no one in the Yaoguang Peak would fight with Qingji Han. After all, her cultivation and powerful talent were obvious. Changhe Lo of the Southern Mountain Range. Please enlighten me. Suddenly, in the quiet team, a white figure stepped forward and walked in front of Qingji Han. This person had a head of white hair and was extremely handsome. His handsome appearance was rare in the world. It was Changhe Lo, who was imprisoned on the Dustfall platform. He dares. A Yaoguang Peak disciple looked extremely shocked. Qingji Han was very strong. In the past 3 years, no one in their peak could withstand the power of her murderous eyes. Everyone was scared by her. www.org Changhe Lo's talent was also very outstanding. He had defeated countless Yaoguang Peak geniuses. Even when Su Jin and Lan Qingwu joined forces, they still couldn't gain an advantage. However, compared to Qingji Han, there was still a gap between them. In the hearts of everyone, Qingji Han was like a demoness who killed without batting an eyelid. She was invincible and became a dark shadow in everyone's heart. Changhe Lo dared to challenge her at this time and provoke her. Mo Xian's gaze was fixed forward. When Changhe Lo defeated the disciples of the Uni Peak, he sensed that Changhe Lo seemed to have been enlightened. In the artistic conception of the zither music, his cultivation had increased by a large level. There were faint rules and Tao intent circulating in his body. Even so, it was simply wishful thinking to want to defeat Qingji Han. Half-step Yuan Emperor and a true emperor were on 2 different levels. In the continent, there had been half-step Yuan emperors who had defeated true emperors. That was because the half-step Yuan emperors were so talented that their rules and Tao intent could crush their opponent. Changhe Lo's talent was not bad. Unfortunately, he met Qingji Han, whose talent was on a higher level. This battle was a contest without any suspense. It's a little unexpected. On the platform, perfected Lord Tianquan spoke slowly. Changhe Lo didn't give him a very good impression. It wasn't because he had plotted against Qin Hao, but because of his bad character. Even though he wasn't a disciple of Tianquan, as an ultimate nirvana powerhouse, he could clearly see through Changhe Lo's Tao heart. However, at this moment, Changhe Lo, who was standing in the middle of the platform, seemed to be different from before. I'm also very surprised. Yaoguang revealed a smile. It seemed that there was a slight change in his state of mind. In the past, he wouldn't have dared to directly face Qingji Han and do something that was impossible. In the past, Changhe Lo would always consider all aspects before acting. He would only make a sudden move when he was 100% confident. Now, he should also know that he was no match for Qingji Han, but he still stood up. You've reached the half-step emperor level? Qingji Han's cold and elegant gaze was extremely sharp, as if it could pierce through Changhe Lo's soul. I just had a breakthrough, Changhe Lo said truthfully. I admire your courage. Qingji Han shifted her gaze and looked at Mo Xian, who was behind Changhe Lo. Even Mo Xian didn't have the guts to fight with her. It had nothing to do with their status, but Mo Xian knew very well how powerful Qingji Han was. However, Changhe Lo actually dared to challenge her in the next second after controlling the rules. You are a beast tamer and you are good at controlling music. But you should know that Master taught me the art of meditation. All music is useless against me. Qingji Han said. The art of meditation could kill one's inner demons, purify one's mind, and resist all music in the world. Changhe Lo's strongest skill was controlling the music. However, his strongest skill was completely countered by Qingji Han. I know. Besides, you are a true emperor. I am at best a fake emperor. My realm is completely suppressed, Chang Helou said calmly. Even so, you still want to fight? Qingji Han asked. Please. Chang Helou sat on the ground. His snow-white hair fluttered in the primordial qi. His Guqin spirit appeared in front of him. His outstanding appearance merged with his clear heart. His temperament was even better than before. It was as if at this moment, he had found his original heart and was back to his true self. Qingji Han's expression was extremely unhappy. She said coldly, I didn't use the will of the Emperor or the art of meditation. It is absolutely fair. But you stood out to fight with me. You should have a certain level of mental awareness. When Xiao Han was fighting for first place, no one from Daozong Peak dared to challenge her. Han Qingji felt that she should also have this kind of weight. But who would have thought that Chang Helou would stand out and ruin her plan? She was very angry. Clang. What responded to Han Qingji was a rapid sound that resembled a burst of sword qi. Chang Helou's slender fingers swept out, causing the zither strings beneath his palms to vibrate. A blazing white blade flew out, transforming into a rain of swords that shot forward. Back off! Qingji Han roared. A burst of Emperor Qi erupted. It was as if she had transformed into the first iron-blooded female emperor of the East Continent. The surging primordial Qi swept out. It was dazzling and shrouded the entire void of the Taoist hall. It tore and swallowed the rain of swords and blasted forward. It swept past Chang Helou, who was sitting on the ground. Buzz. Like the impact of a huge wave, Chang Helou's body leaned back slightly. His chest felt stuffy. The roar shook his qi and blood. His meridians felt as if they were about to explode. A warm current surged into his throat. He couldn't help but spit on the strings. Sovereign's descent. Chang Helou swallowed back the saliva. His face was flushed. His snow-white hair fluttered in the wind. Blue veins flashed on his face. He changed his 5 fingers to 10 fingers. A majestic and torrential sound reverberated. As he changed his hand gestures quickly, he directly cut into the essence of the song. At this moment, he recalled the scene of his battle with Qin Hao at the auction in Golden Light City. That day, he lost 3 battles and was utterly defeated. He didn't have any dignity as a genius of the southern region and became the laughingstock of the southern region. However, at this moment, what was imprinted in his mind was the image of Qin Hao wielding his sword. His steps were as if he was stepping on the mountains and rivers of the universe. Wherever the tip of his sword pointed, he was invincible. It was like the best portrayal of a song, completely suppressing Chang Helou's tsujing. Scene after scene continuously assaulted Chang Helou's nerve. Even though his internal organs were shaken to the point of unbearable pain, he was like a zither demon going berserk. His 10 fingers strummed the strings as he sank into Qin Hao's murderous intent. Using the sound of the zither, he outlined the phantom of a king, holding the emperor's sword in his hand, and charged towards Han Qingji. At this moment, an emperor's domineering aura enveloped the entire Taoist hall. For a moment, everyone in the 7 peaks was in an uproar. What an arrogant emperor's aura! Tianquan was slightly surprised. This song wasn't very brilliant. Moreover, Chang Helou's cultivation was pitifully low. He hadn't even stepped into the true emperor's path. However, the emperor's will contained in his song was too strong. It was like a murderous intent, portraying a great emperor of flesh and blood who was awe-inspiring in front of everyone's eyes. Ning Tianxing frowned slightly. He had heard this song once before. It was during the grand auction held by Ning Wu in Golden Light City that was held once every 5 years. However, at that time, Chang Helou's Sovereign Descent song was completely different from today's. It only had the form and didn't truly display the aura of a great emperor. Now, the emperor's will was very strong. It was as if a great emperor was born from the song, walking in front of the crowd and shocking the world. Zheng Qingqi also had the same feeling. However, his gaze was fixed on Qin Hao. The emperor's figure charging toward Qingji Han clearly had Qin Hao's shadow. Chapter 1525. Majestic Guqin music filled the training ground. Chang Helua used his Guqin will to condense an illusory figure, as if an emperor had arrived before the battle. Holding the emperor's sword in his hand, a blazing light burst forth as he slashed down at Han Qingji. The peerless might that could swallow the world was praised by the disciples of the various peaks. Many of the older disciples who had stepped into the Emperor realm were able to see a trace of the true essence of the Emperor realm from the body of the phantom. Qingji Han frowned. She was shocked by the Emperor's phantom. She couldn't help but feel a faint sense of admiration, as if she had seen a real emperor. There were many emperors in the East Continent, and not all of them could make her feel admiration. She only felt this way when facing the sunset battle god of the East Continent and Empress Ling Xian. But now, she was affected by Chang Heluo's Guqin. She felt like she was falling into his music. Boom! Han Qingji lifted her palm and slammed it forward. Her mind was in a trance for only an instant before she immediately recovered. Her jade-like hands that seemed fair and soft actually contained a sharp and tyrannical might. A resplendent platinum palm imprint flew out, slamming forward heavily, annihilating the Emperor Phantom with a single palm strike. It was incomparably domineering. Her Guqin intent is very strong, but her cultivation is too weak. Tianquan said. After all, he was just a fake emperor. Even if his Guqin skills were extraordinary, the difference in cultivation between them was too big. He couldn't resist Qingji Han at all. Qingji Han only said that she wouldn't use the Emperor's will or the meditation art, but she didn't promise to suppress her cultivation. Based on the situation, she was going to crush Chang Heluo. Perfected Lord Daozong nodded and said, "Let's not forget one thing. Qingji Han's soul is the eye of nirvana. She has always been the one to influence the will of others. She will never be influenced by others." Throughout the ancient times, those who possessed the eye of nirvana were all extremely powerful existences with extremely high achievements. They were all representative experts of every era. Even if Qingji Han didn't use the meditation art, Chang Heluo's Guqin wouldn't be able to shake her soul. This was the difference in talent. At this moment, the dazzling palm print shattered the Guqin illusion and continued to move forward towards Chang Heluo. Chang Heluo felt a suffocating pressure sweep over him. The strong sense of suppression was just like the time when he faced Qin Hao. It was difficult to resist. His 10 fingers swept across the strings of the Guqin, and his Guqin spirit shone with a dazzling light. It turned into a musical enchantment in front of him. Then, there was a deafening explosion. The palm print hit the musical enchantment. Although he had blocked Qingji Han's attack, he was still sitting on the ground. His snow-white hair was messy, and he was clearly struggling. "Chang Heluo, that's enough. You're no match for him. Don't embarrass yourself and embarrass the Xianyuan clan." A member of the Xianyuan family yelled at the training hall, telling him to give up. "Battle the heavens." Chang Heluo turned a deaf ear to him. His eyes flashed with an even stronger fighting spirit. Xianyuan? Now they remembered that he was Xianyuan Wuying's adopted son, and remembered his identity. Why didn't anyone from the Xianyuan family come to visit him when he was imprisoned on the Dustfall platform and burned by lightning and fire? He was fighting to find his original heart. Now, the Xianyuan family thought he was an embarrassment. Did he embarrass the Southern Pride family and bring shame to the Southern Pride royal family? He waved his fingers even more wildly. He forgot everything. It had nothing to do with fame and fortune. He only wanted to find his true self on the martial path. Chang Heluo seemed to have fallen into a frenzy. He was intoxicated and played to his heart's content. The battle song was even more exciting than the sovereign's descent. It made people's blood boil. It filled the void and melted into the great path. A huge sun appeared in the sky above the training hall. The flames burned brightly. It shot out the divine light of the sun and fell on Qingji Han's head. A hurricane suddenly rose. The wind pressure carried the power to destroy mountains. It swallowed forward, and the training hall trembled. The blizzard raged and covered the sky. Ice and snow flooded the ground as if to bury Qingji Han. Ancient beasts, soaring dragons, circling phoenixes. At this moment, they appeared vividly. The disciples of the various peaks gasped in amazement. This was especially true when a 300-meter-tall golden ape was condensed from the zither music. It stood in the air and smashed down with a huge staff. It was so domineering that even Haisha, who came from the Golden Ape clan, couldn't help but exclaim, "Nice." The true meaning of this huge golden ape was drawn out by Changhe Lo's zither. It was wild and wild. It didn't submit to the heavens, didn't respect the earth, and didn't fear the gods and demons. It shocked the people of the Seven Peaks. The manifestation of the heavens and earth. Demons dance wildly. Only the zither in Changhe Lo's hands is worthy of the battle of the heavens. Qin Hao, who was disguised as Shou Wuk, said as he watched the battle. The will of the battle song was even more exciting than before. Changhe Lo was clearly affected by something. He stepped out of his self-satisfied state and entered a new height. Unfortunately, although the song had improved, the opponent was even stronger. Destruction of the heavens. Qingji Han's qi surged. Her body broke through the air. A huge wave of spiritual energy radiated. It was as if it had shaken the heavens. She directly broke through the sun. She raised her palm and blasted out a 5-fingered illusory peak, which fell on the head of the huge ape. The impassioned sound of the zither poured into the body of the huge ape. A deafening roar sounded in the dojo. The huge staff swung out. Heaven and earth roared as it swept towards the falling 5-fingered illusory peak. Rumble! In this collision, the great Tao seemed to be smashed. The terrifying sound of the explosion shook everyone's eardrums. However, the huge staff shattered. The 5-fingered illusory peak pressed down and crushed the body of the huge golden ape. The huge ape struggled to support it. It was as if Changhe Lo's will was supporting the heavens. Cruelly, it still couldn't bear the weight of the 5-fingered illusory peak. It was suppressed and annihilated. "Break for me!" Han Qingji let out a shrill cry. Her spirit, which was filled with the power of nirvanic extermination, swept out. The terrifying spirit spread out. Anything that was affected by her spirit web, be it giant dragons or phoenixes, melted the blizzard, shattered the hurricane, disintegrated the heavens, and all living things were annihilated. With just a thought, it swept across the heavens. Puff! A mouthful of blood sprayed on the zither strings. The impassioned battle music stopped. Changhe Lo's mind was invaded by the power of destruction. Like a withered flower, his aura weakened rapidly. His spiritual energy was severely damaged. He couldn't muster up any fighting spirit. "You're too weak. You're not worthy of my primordial spirit." Qingji Han stood in the air. Her cold eyes looked down at Changhe Lo. She was like a high and mighty empress looking down on him. So far, not only had she not released her emperor's will, she hadn't used the art of meditation. She hadn't even released her primordial spirit. Changhe Lo couldn't resist the invasion of her spiritual energy. Were all half-step great emperors so useless? Changhe Lo admit defeat. A disciple of the Xianyuan family couldn't help but say. Qingji Han was too powerful. The first princess of the East Continent wasn't someone they could challenge. Even if Prince Jie were alive, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. Another person sighed. Changhe Lo had tried his best, but Qingji Han was too strong and ruthless. In this generation of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Jie's talent was unparalleled. He was born with the great emperor's body and inherited the great Tao of gravity. He was completely obsessed with martial arts and couldn't extricate himself. He had been secretly trained by the family and had never shown his talent to the outside world. In fact, Xianyuan Jie's combat power was very abnormal. It was just that before he had the time to blossom, he was killed by Qin Hao. Even so, if he were alive, he wouldn't dare to fight with Qingji Han. Chang Hello was simply asking for it. I want to try again. Chang Hello wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Under his messy white hair, he didn't look dispirited. On the contrary, he smiled happily. He put down his burdens and fought with all his heart. He fought with the true genius of the continent and understood his opponent's martial arts power. He didn't have to care about what others thought and didn't have to worry about his reputation. Even if he lost, he would lose happily. If you had a musical essence spirit, you would definitely be the best disciple of Master. In this battle, I have seen the glory of the first princess of the East Continent. I will take the last move. Chang Hello sat upright and looked up into the sky with a smile. He didn't think it was embarrassing to be looked down at by Qingji Han. At this moment, Qingji Han's cold eyes flashed with a sharp light. Was he using her to practice? Was Chang Hello worthy? Buzz. A Guqin intent surged into the sky. Chang Hello pulled the strings again, but this time, his fingers were no longer as nimble. He was hit by the power of nirvana and his mind was in a mess. It was already very difficult for him to sit upright. But this Guqin sound contained a kind of law. The law that he had just comprehended was not complete. It was only a prototype, but he wanted to give it a try. This was the first time he released his law power. It turned out that unknowingly, he had already grown from a poor boy in a dilapidated village to a powerhouse that was respected and revered by the martial artists of the continent. This was something that he didn't dare to imagine in the past, but he also longed for. The Guqin sound filled the air and fell on Qingji Han. Invaded by the Guqin sound, her mind shook as if she was in another world. There was nothing here. The sky was covered with boundless weeds, full of desolation. It was like a world that was spurned by people. This was Chang Hello's law concept, born from his heart. Although it was desolate, it made one feel incomparably small. It was like a heaven and earth that could not be defied. It trapped one's will, making it impossible to escape. One would forever have to live in this place that no one cared about, I call it boundless. I haven't discovered the true power of this law yet, but it is like my home. When I was young, I was born in this kind of place. It may be ugly, but I actually like it very much. In the desolate and dilapidated world, Chang Hello's words echoed. Qingji Han was dumbfounded on the spot. He dared to use it on others without unearthing the power of the law. He had just comprehended the prototype of the law, and he wanted to let her, the first princess of the East Continent, experience it? Get lost. Han Qingji's fury surged as if she had been greatly humiliated. Her boundlessly tyrannical mental power wreaked havoc, destroying this barren world. An incomparably terrifying abyssal eye appeared in the sky, shooting out an endless amount of sharp killing light. Rays of light crisscrossed, and endless rays of light spread. Space was torn apart, heaven and earth were shattered, and Chang Hello's law concept suddenly disappeared. Swoosh! A ray of dazzling light shot down from the void and poured into Chang Hello's mind. In the training hall, a shrill scream sounded. Everyone saw that Chang Hello's Guqin soul collapsed on the spot. He hugged his head with both hands and rolled on the ground as if he had suddenly gone insane. Blood began to ooze out of his 7 orifices, as if his spirit had suffered extremely serious damage. Chapter 1526. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. The battle of the strongest. The moment the light from the eye of Nirvana invaded his mind, Chang Hello felt as if he had fallen into a demonic abyss. A terrifying blood coffin appeared in his mind. It was boundlessly huge, and blood seeped out from the gaps in the coffin. Rotten hands climbed out from the coffin, and broken bodies crawled out. Those faces were people he was familiar with, enemies he had killed with his own hand. Countless rotten bodies crawled out, and like vengeful spirits, they surrounded Chang Hello. Maggot-covered hands dragged him into the blood coffin, wanting to bury him with them. At that moment, Chang Hello felt as if his mind and soul were being pulled into the coffin. His will collapsed on the spot. He had the idea of sparring with Qingji Han normally, trying out the laws he had just comprehended. Unexpectedly, the other party's counterattack was so fierce. In the training hall, the disciples of the Seven Peaks watched in shock. Qingji Han was domineering and fierce, instantly suppressing Chang Hello. They didn't know how much damage his mind had suffered. Without using the laws of Emperor Intent or the Tranquil Heart Art, just a strand of soul power was enough to make the Yao Guang Immortal Monarch's personal disciple unable to resist. She lived up to her reputation as the #1 princess of the East Continent. "Stop!" A dignified voice rang out. It was the voice of the Yao Guang Immortal Monarch, who was sitting on the platform. It contained overwhelming Tao intent, and instantly dispersed the Nirvana soul power that had invaded Chang Hello's mind, waking him up. The blood coffin disappeared, and Chang Hello's mind gradually recovered. At this moment, his hair was disheveled, and he looked at Qingji Han with a look of fear. His clothes were soaked in cold sweat. "Qingji, you went a little overboard," said Yao Guang. Chang Hello had just peeked into the half-step emperor realm, and the laws he had comprehended were only in the embryonic form. They didn't have any destructive power. There was a certain gap between his cultivation and Qingji Han's. Even if she didn't use the Emperor Intent, that terrifying Nirvana soul power wasn't something Chang Hello could contend against. "I wasn't able to control myself," Han Qingji replied. She glanced at Chang Hello coldly, her face still filled with anger. What kind of status did she have? Chang Hello dared to use her as a sparring partner? In the East Continent, such a person would have been killed by her on the spot. However, since her master said that she was too heavy-handed, there was no need for her to refute. After all, Yao Guang had treated her well, and she had always held respect and gratitude in her heart. "From today onward, you shall be one of the peak seats of my peak. You shall spread the Tao Peak's sound technique," Yao Guang said. "Yes, master." Qingji Han bowed in the direction of the Tao platform and stepped into the ranks of the first seat. She stood beside Yizue and silently glanced at Xiao Han. If not for Chang Hello's interference, she would have been able to intimidate the entire peak, and no one would dare to challenge her. The Eye of Nirvana is truly tyrannical. Although Chang Hello hasn't truly stepped into the Emperor realm, he is proficient in music and his will is incomparably strong. "Even so, he couldn't resist the Nirvana soul at all," commented Taoist Canon. This was enough to set off Qingji Han's ability. Looking at the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, the personal disciples of the Peak Masters, such as Mo Xian, Zhou Wudao and Zhang Yi, were all powerful. Even if they were at the same level, it would be difficult for them to resist. Only a peerless genius like Xiao Han, who was born with a spirit body of the Great Path, was qualified to compete with Qingji Han. Yao Guang deity nodded in agreement. Qingji Han's talent was indeed outstanding. She was already standing at the top of this generation of martial artists. Then, her eyes fell on Chang Hello. She said, "Chang Hello, you should also step down. Although you lost this battle, we saw your growth. Remember your original intentions, and you can prove the Great Path. I hope you will break through soon." "Thank you for your teachings, Master. I will live up to your expectations." Chang Hello stood up and bowed. His face was haggard. He dragged his tired body back to the team of Yaoguang Peak. No one was willing to come forward to help him. After he returned to the team, no one even said a word of concern. There were even some snickers among the disciples, as if they were laughing at him for overestimating himself. Chang Hello's expression was calm. He had long been accustomed to this because he had always been alone. At this time, his heart was as calm as water, and he would no longer bear a grudge against the mockery. He wanted to walk a path different from the past, a path of purity. The opinions of others didn't matter. He only wanted to prove his original intentions and the great path of the Emperor. Your disciple seems to have changed a lot. This is a good thing. Migres nodded. He could feel the subtle changes. Next, the competition for the position of the peak continued. Xian and Su Jin stepped out of the line at the same time. As if they had agreed beforehand, they stood in the middle of the training hall with extraordinary tacit understanding. The two of them didn't fight intensely, and there weren't any sparks. The scene was surprisingly calm. As the power of the realm unfolded, Xian and Su Jin entered a battle of consciousness, just like how Qin Hao fought Feng Qianli. In the end, Xian won and became the second candidate for the Yaoguang Peak's peak seat. At that moment, Su Jin confidently returned to the team. His condition was extremely good, as if he hadn't used any energy at all. It was unknown how he and Xian had sparred in the realm battle, but even Xian couldn't see the slightest bit of exhaustion. Mizar Hall's Zhan Yi and Mizar Hall's Haisha, Xiantian Peak's Xiaogua and Gu Kuei, Taiwei Peak's Tan Gung and North Gate's Xuanda. One after another, the candidates for the peak seats were born one after another. In the end, 12 were chosen to become the new chief. Migres Hall's Qin Hao was alone. Uni Peak's Ning Tianxing was alone. The other 5 peaks each had 2. These 12 people were this year's new peak seat. They would replace the positions of Eastern Sky, Yi Zue and Shenghua, and become the role models for the disciples of the Divine Palace's 7 peaks. However, what puzzled all the peak masters and elders present was that during the whole process, except for Ning Tianxing's strong sweep of a peak and the collision between Qingji Han and Chang Helou, the rest of the people didn't fight. All of them ended in a battle of consciousness, and no one was injured. For some reason, this group of disciples was extremely strange, just like the agreed half. Although Migres, Daozong, Yunyi, and the 7 peak masters didn't understand, they didn't think it was unreasonable. It was the disciples' freedom to use whatever method to compete, and they had no right to interfere. From today onwards, the 12 of you will be the peak seats of the Divine Palace's 7 peaks. You will set an example, abide by the rules of the Divine Palace, and inherit the martial arts spirit of the Divine Palace. Migres stood up and said. All the peak masters stood up at the same time and bowed in the direction of Migres' peak. Set an example, abide by the rules of the Divine Palace, inherit the martial arts spirit of the Divine Palace, and may the martial arts of the sect prosper. Qin Hao and the others, as well as the 12 peak seats of the previous Eastern Sky, all bowed in the direction of Migres' peak. The disciples of the 7 peaks in the training hall all looked at them with envy. They really hoped that the people standing in the line of peak seats were themselves. After all, each peak seat was a candidate for the peak master, and there was a great chance that they would cultivate to the Nirvana realm in the future. A Nirvana realm great emperor. What a tyrannical and monstrous cultivation. Once they stepped into the secular world, no one would be able to stop them. It was possible that they could sweep across the 4 regions. No one knew how strong the sunset battle god of the East Continent was, except for Qingji Han. But the disciples all agreed that no matter how strong the sunset battle god was, his cultivation was probably on par with a peak seat of the Divine Palace. How many sunset battle gods were there in the East Continent? There was only one, Zhan Wu. But the Divine Palace had always maintained the tradition of having 12 peak seats of the Nirvana realm. Such power was very explosive. I'm so envious of the Nirvana realm great emperor. It's said that his lifespan has surpassed the limit of a great emperor, and he has a lifespan of more than 2,000 years. Life is a good thing. Who doesn't want to live more? More than that. Don't forget the Divine Palace's edict. The goal of the peak masters is to break through to the divine level and ascend to the vast deity realm. The legendary deity realm. That's what makes us envious. Legends are legends after all. Who knows if there are divine-level overlords in the history of the divine wilderness? Even if a martial lord ancestral patriarch became a god, there hasn't been a second person in the divine palace for a long time. There's no proof at all. Shut up. Look at the situation. Don't let the peak masters hear us and punish us, the disciples discussed. Becoming a god was the ultimate goal of the divine palace's peak masters. Even though there hadn't been a second divine-level overlord, every peak master had the cultivation of the nirvana realm. This terrible power was enough to make the disciples yearn for it. Buzz. Brilliant light appeared above the platform. At the same time, the world-shaking divine soldier appeared one by one. The 12 golden battlesuits were lined up side by side. The turbulent emperor's chi rolled and spread, suppressing the entire platform. It was the Xiantian Peak's 12 divine soldier. Today you are their masters. The Xiantian deity smiled. As an elder, this was a gift to the disciples. She raised her hand and motioned for the 12 new peak masters to come forward and take it. At this moment, Qin Hao and the others stepped forward at the same time toward the platform. They stared at the 12 battlesuit. Everyone's goal was very clear. Only Xiao Han and Qingji Han walked toward one of the battlesuits together. The shape of the battlesuit was Pisces entwined. Qingji Han stepped forward and turned to block Xiao Han. She said coldly, "Do you still want to fight with me?" "Fight?" Xiao Han looked at her. "When did the rule say that it belongs to you?" When they were at the Xiantian Peak, the divine soldier was in the box. They couldn't see its true appearance, but they could feel the tyrannical spiritual will. Now the divine soldier appeared in the form of Pisces. But this wasn't important. What was important was who should take it. At this time, the first princess of the Dongzhou continent and the pearl of Emperor Shao of the northern frontier stood face to face. Their faces were incomparably beautiful. Strong sparks appeared in the eyes of the two women again. A wave of battle intent spread, which also alarmed the others. Qin Hao and the others all stopped. "You all want it?" the Xiantian deity asked on the platform. "Yes," Xiao Han and Qingji Han replied in unison. "Interesting." The Yao Guang deity glanced at the Xiantian deity. "In that case, senior sister, why don't you let them spar? The winner will get it." Previously, Xiao Han and Qingji Han had already fought when the Fire Beacon Grand Banquet was held at the Xiantian Peak. It would be difficult to persuade them today. Besides, who should they persuade? It wouldn't be good to persuade either of them to withdraw. In that case, they should let them fight. "Do as junior sister Yao Guang says. You can decide for yourselves," the Xiantian deity said. "Do you dare to come down?" Qingji Han's primordial qi surged and she landed on the platform. She stared at Xiao Han. A terrifying emperor qi emanated from her body. The platinum light was incomparably strong. Obviously, she would use all her strength in this battle. She wouldn't be as casual as she was with Chang Hello. If she used all her strength, how could Xiao Han stop her? "Why wouldn't I dare?" Xiao Han touched the ground with the tip of her toes, stretched out her arms, and floated down from the platform. In an instant, the same intense platinum light erupted, like a whirlwind circling around her. Her aura was strong and powerful. Something big is about to happen. The disciples of the Seven Peaks were slightly shocked. The battle between two empresses who had truly stepped into the Emperor realm was probably going to be very intense. Everyone in the Seven Peaks knew that Xiao Han's talent was equally terrifying. During the Fallen Emperor Bei test, she actually suppressed Qingji Han. Their battle would definitely not be like Chang Hello, who was completely crushed. It would be an evenly matched battle. "Martial niece Yao Guang, my disciple Xiao Han is not Chang Hello. Are you really not worried about letting them fight?" Daozong said with a smile. He was very calm. Martial uncle, Qingji hasn't met a worthy opponent yet. Why don't we watch? Yao Guang replied with a smile. The two peak venerables seem to be vaguely competing with each other. In that case, why don't we add another battle? Qin Hao, do you dare to come down from the platform and fight? Suddenly, Ning Tianxing turned around and landed on the platform. His proud eyes stared at the successor of the Divine Palace Master of Migres Hall. He wanted to fight Qin Hao. Chapter 1527. Everyone's hearts trembled as they looked at the three figures in the arena. The first princess of the East Continent, the proud daughter of Xiao Wudi of the northern frontier, and the crown prince of the martial Ning Empire. All three of them were extremely talented and could be said to be at the peak of their generation. The battle between Qingji Han and Xiao Han was already exciting enough, but no one expected that Crown Prince Ning Wu would also challenge Qin Hao at this time. Qin Hao was the disciple of Palace Lord Migres and the absolute core of the Divine Palace. He was recognized as the strongest person in the Seven Peaks. Was Ning Tianxing trying to prove something by challenging Qin Hao? In any case, the atmosphere in the training hall reached a boiling point. Everyone felt the blood in their body churning, and their emotions becoming extremely excited. This battle would definitely be the most exciting confrontation of this year's Truth Symposium. It was enough for everyone to feast their eyes on. In the past assessment, the Emperor's mirror was used to test a warrior's fate. I have the fate of the great Emperor. Everyone can see that. Although your fate is not obvious, the mirror unexpectedly collapsed. After entering the Divine Palace, Palace Lord Migres accepted you as his disciple. In fact, at that time I was not convinced. But it's all in the past. Ning Tianxing looked at Qin Hao and said, Today's battle will let the Seven Peak Masters see if the first place in the assessment of the fallen Emperor Bei is worthy of the title of the strongest talent of our generation. It will also test our cultivation. When we were at the Xiantian Peak, didn't you say that you wanted to learn from me? If so, I will accompany you. As Ning Tianxing's words fell, everyone understood. Obviously, Crown Prince Ning Wu was not convinced and wanted to use this battle to prove that his talent was not below Qin Hao. He wanted to take back his original position of first place. It was as if that position should belong to him and not Qin Hao. Moreover, Qin Hao did say that he wanted to fight with him. On the right side of the first-place team, Shou Wuk, who was standing next to Shenghua, had a dim look in his eyes. He certainly knew that the person Ning Tianxing really wanted to challenge was actually him. The existence that looked like Qin Hao on the right was actually the dragon spirit Dharma idol, not Qin Hao himself. On the day of the Fire Beacon Feast, Xiao Han was fighting with Qingji Han when he was suddenly attacked by Ning Tianxing's Guqin. That Guqin was called a dissuasion, but in reality, it was only aimed at Xiao Han. Obviously, it was very selfish and wanted to protect Qingji Han. Of course, Qin Hao couldn't turn a blind eye to it. As a man, he would never allow an outsider to bully his woman. Qin Hao was not afraid of competing with Ning Tianxing, but he had neglected the fact that Ning Tianxing had chosen today, when he was pretending to be Shou Wuk, to compete with him. It should be known that what maintained Qin Hao's appearance was only his Dharma form. Let his Dharma form fight with Ning Tianxing? How about it? As a disciple of the Palace Lord, you have been taught by the Seven Peaks secret technique. Even if you haven't stepped into the Dharch realm, you have already mastered the complete nomological power. You won't be afraid of a battle, right? Ning Tianxing said. On the day of the Xiantian Peak, he released a Guqin sound, which was swallowed by the starry sky released by Qin Hao. The bright starry sky contained the power of the great Tao, and it already had the complete nomological power. Therefore, in this battle, Ning Tianxing would not suppress his realm to fight. He would use all his strength and seriously compete with Qin Hao. He also knew very well that even if the other party had not stepped into the Dharch realm, he had the absolute qualifications to compete with the early-stage Dharch Yuan. Once he went easy on him, he would only be the one who would suffer. Moreover, Qin Hao himself was not weak, and he had received the teachings of the Seven Peak Venerables. Every kind of Dharch realm technique he cultivated was extremely strong. Ning Tianxing would not make a stupid mistake, and he would use all his strength to deal with it. At this moment, the eyes of the disciples of the Seven Peaks were all focused on the position of the Dharma idol. In their eyes, that person was Qin Hao, the disciple of the Palace Lord. If Qin Hao did not agree, he would become the laughing-stock of the Seven Peaks. He probably couldn't afford to lose face. Tianquan, what do you think? Old Taoist Yun Yi looked at the Palace Lord. Although Ning Tianxing was his disciple, he had also taught Qin Hao before. These two juniors were extremely talented. In all fairness, in perfected Lord Yun Yi's heart, he couldn't tell who was better. Qin Hao, what do you think? Tianquan said with his eyes closed. He wanted to ask for his disciple's opinion first. The voice rumbled out, spreading throughout the Dao Plaza. Others might not have been able to sense it, but Qin Hao, who had transformed into a headless, unblemished head, felt his heart tremble. This voice was clearly directed at him, and it was like the sound of a bell ringing in his ears. I've been seen through. Qin Hao was shocked. He deliberately imitated Shou Wu's aura, suppressing the soul power in his body. His entire body was only surrounded by sword intent, as if he was a natural swordsman. Even if he used an Dharch realm secret technique to cover it up, his master still saw through his true identity. How terrifying was Nirvana the Great! But his master did not expose him, and even silently warned him. Clearly, even if Tianquan did not know why Qin Hao was pretending to be Shou Wu, he still chose to believe in his disciple. I accept your challenge on behalf of Qin Hao. Shou Wu took a step forward, and sword intent rumbled around him. His sharp eyes were like two rays of sword light, piercing towards the center of the training hall. Ning Tianxing turned his head slightly and looked at Shou Wu of Daozong Peak. The successor of the southern region's Sword Emperor, who also came from a royal family, was not inferior to the martial Ning Empire. Moreover, this person had always been regarded as the true number one in the southern region for 2 generations. He was known to be unparalleled in the way of the sword. The martial lord once said that he was qualified to become a sword god. Now, Shou Wu was also a peak, representing the will of Daozong Peak. However, Ning Tianxing was not interested in him. Even if Shou Wu was born with the way of the sword, in Ning Tianxing's heart, this person was still not enough. You're no match for me. Ning Tianxing replied indifferently. He could only challenge Qin Hao, the only person in the continent who was qualified to accept his challenge. The successor of the southern region's Sword Emperor was not qualified. What nonsense are you talking about? A disciple of Daozong Peak roared. This Ning Tianxing was too arrogant. He had not even fought, and he dared to say that the peak of Daozong Peak was not enough. If you want to fight, I'll withdraw. Because I never fight a battle that has a result, Ning Tianxing said. Finally, he looked at Fa Xiang with a faint look of disappointment and prepared to leave the training hall. Qin Hao did not even have the courage to face him? Okay, I'll fight with you, Fa Xiang said. As he spoke, he walked step by step towards the center of the training hall. You're no match for him. Qin Hao secretly transmitted his voice, and his expression tensed up. Do I have a choice? Fa Xiang walked past Shou Wu step by step and came to the opposite side of Ning Tianxing. Just to learn from each other? Just to learn from each other, Ning Tianxing replied, feeling a wave of excitement in his heart. He was finally willing to come down. Did you hear that? Just to learn from each other. Fa Xiang turned around and smiled at Qin Hao. Although he had replicated Qin Hao's ability and grasped the essence of his martial way, He also had the power of Qin Hao's 3 souls. Unfortunately, Fa Xiang did not have the body of a demigod, nor did he have the vast spirit of a great emperor like Qin Hao. There was a fundamental difference between them, which was very important. If Qin Hao fought with Ning Tianxing, he would not be afraid of being crushed by his emperor's will. Even if he had not stepped into the great emperor realm, his soul was already at the level of a great emperor. It was the greatest counterattack weapon, and also Qin Hao's protective talisman against great emperors. However, Fa Xiang's soul was very weak. After stepping into the great emperor realm, he only had the power of an emperor. Even with the Red Lotus Overlord Fire, the Dragon Soul, and the Tranquil Water to recover, he could not withstand the suppression of Ning Tianxing's emperor's will. It seemed like a small difference, but it was the key to their strength. Fa Xiang would definitely lose this battle. Fa Xiang knew in his heart that he was no match for Ning Xingtian, but he had to stand up now because he had no other choice. Should he fight? He had to stall for time so that the real Shou Wuk could complete his plan before he was defeated. If he did not fight, Qin Hao would become the laughingstock of the 7 Peaks. It was not a big deal to become a laughingstock, but there was no guarantee that it would not attract the attention of the mastermind behind the Divine Palace. Because the real Qin Hao was never afraid of battle. In that case, let's fight 2 on 2. Seeing this, Xiao Han came to Fa Xiang's side and stood side by side. Although he knew it was fake, he could vaguely sense a trace of Qin Hao from Fa Xiang. No problem. Ning Xingtian took the initiative to walk to Qingji Han's side. At this moment, the 4 of them faced each other, and the atmosphere seemed to be still. But the hearts of all the disciples in the training hall were beating wildly, and their blood flowed faster. They were so excited that they could not help but want to shout and howl. Qin Hao, who had disguised himself as Fa Xiang, retreated back into the group. This contest was already a foregone conclusion. Xiao Han had chosen to fight 2v2 with the intention of assisting Fa Xiang, hoping that Fa Xiang could last a little longer. Let's do it. Qingji Han was very reluctant to join forces with Ning Tianxing, but she also knew that if they did not join forces, they would be defeated one by Xiao Han and Qin Hao. Buzz, buzz, buzz. 4 dazzling lights exploded in the training hall, like 4 violent storms raging. The sweeping power was enough to make people tremble in fear. Whether one was a top genius or not, at this moment it was enough for people to tell. Each of these 4 waves of power steadily overshadowed Chang Helo's. They were really domineering. Although in the 4 storms of vitality, Qin Hao of Migre's palace was surging with golden flames, which symbolized the Renhuang Plain, under the influence of a layer of inexplicable power. His golden flames were far beyond the ordinary Renhuang Plain, reaching a frightening level. Its strength was as terrifying as the Emperor's qi. It was Fa Xiang who was using the endless samsara technique. Buzz! The void changed color. On one side of the training hall, where Qingji Han was, the entire place was shrouded in haze. The haze was like a black wave that pushed forward wildly, wanting to kill Qin Hao and the others. This was a layer of spiritual waves with a terrifying death attribute. At the same time, Ning Tianxing's Guqin spirit appeared. He sat in the air, his palms sweeping like the wind. Platinum musical notes danced, wrapped in the power of the Great Path rules, turning into countless transparent swords that fell from the sky. The rain of swords flew, covering the sky and the sun. The whistling sword light cut through the sky as fast as lightning. The scene of tens of thousands of swords falling was like the end of the world, about to destroy the entire Path Peak. This terrifying scene made the hearts of the disciples of the 7 Peaks tremble. The combination of the strong and the strong was simply too powerful. Not to mention how terrifying Qingji Han's spirit of nirvana was. Just the sword rain of the void played by Ning Tianxing and the power of the rules that came whistling down were not much weaker than Shou Wuk's 10,000 swords Empyrean Peak. If it were anyone else, they would probably be sitting on the ground and waiting for death. Chapter 1528. The power of Nirvana engulfed the sky, and in the void the sword rain fell. At this moment, Xiao Han's body erupted with a brilliant light as he released his source spirit. The resplendent crown on his head was like a fountain as it emitted an endless divine radiance. It occupied half the sky and blocked Han Qingji's Nirvana spirit. Move! Xiao Han pointed upwards, and the will of the emperor rose to meet the sword rain. Under the influence of the rules, a fault appeared in the sky, and the sword rain fell into the fault, disappearing one after another. At the same time, Ning Tianxing's expression changed slightly as he felt a suffocating pressure above his head. Just as he looked up, he saw a sharp light fill the sky. The sword rain that had disappeared above Xiao Han's head fell towards the two of them. Ning Tianxing and Qingji Han immediately retreated. Swish, 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 swish. Countless swords fell from the void and rays of light flashed. Each sword was incomparably sharp and could destroy one's soul. However, when the sword rain fell into the training hall, it melted into the ground as if it had fallen into a quagmire. The entire Uni Peak was enveloped by an array, and the stone slabs were formed by the array. So strong! The disciples were shocked. Uni Peak was worthy of being called the strongest peak in the Divine Palace. Even when such destructive swords fell, they could not damage it in the slightest. Of course, it was not only the peak that was strong. Xiao Han released her soul power and rules. Not only did she block Ning Tianxing and Qingji Han's attacks, she even redirected the attacks to the two of them. 1 against 2, she did not retreat at all. During this time, Qin Hao did not even make a move. Spatial shift. Ning Tianxing stared at Xiao Han, and his expression was no longer as relaxed. The other party could dissolve the attack out of thin air, create a fault in space in a short time, and redirect the attack to the target. This kind of rule was very strong. Why don't you make a move? Xiao Han took a few deep breaths. It was not easy to resist the power of nirvanic extermination head-on. Moreover, she had used her rules to move Ning Tianxing's void sword rain away. Forcefully controlling someone else's rules consumed a lot of her energy. Wait for the right time. The Dharma idol replied calmly. Without entering the imperial realm, it could not resist the suppression of Ning Tianxing's imperial will, including Qingji Han's destructive power. If it wanted to break through its opponent's defensive line, it would have to gather its strongest attack and forcefully break through. However, that kind of powerful attack would not be able to hit its opponent. Moreover, it would consume a lot of energy, so it needed to find the best opportunity to attack. Xiao Han was a little depressed. It seemed that this fake body was indeed very different from the real Qin Hao. If it had been Qin Hao just now, he definitely wouldn't have let go of the opportunity to attack the moment she moved the void sword rain away. At most, I can block the attacks, but I can't guarantee how long I can last. You'll have to act according to the situation, Xiao Han said. Ning Tianxing and Qingji Han were also extremely strong. If this continued, her strength would be limited. Fa Xiang remained silent. He stared at Ning Tianxing with his sharp eyes, which were like two beams of spear light. You guard against Xiao Han. I'll be the main attacker, Ning Tianxing said. Suddenly, his aura changed again. His black hair surged and his eyes shot out a wild aura. It was as if he had become a different person. Then, his 5 fingers pulled the strings and the great Tao accents bombarded. The Guqin spirit shook out a majestic sound wave, like the roaring of the sea. Layers of sound waves rumbled continuously, enveloping all directions of the training hall and actually closing in on Xiao Han. Spatial transfer? Let's see how she can move again? In an instant, the great Tao Guqin spirit shook violently, surrounding the entire battlefield. It was everywhere. Thousands of soldiers and horses dragged the war drums, shaking everyone's hearts. It made them feel as if their hearts were about to burst and their blood wanted to spurt out from their pores. Fa Xiang's face suddenly became a little pale. He was surrounded by the great Dao accent. Layers of great Dao accents rumbled and pressed toward the center. His soul felt like it was about to shatter. His aura shook violently and the soul power in his body showed signs of chaos. In this situation, it was difficult for him to maintain his mind, let alone counterattack. Xiao Han also felt the same, but she had stepped into the imperial realm and the emperor will was incomparably strong. The impact was limited. Even like this, the crown's source spirit had become much dimmer. Explode. As soon as Ning Xingtian finished speaking, his turbulent emperor will merged into the great Dao accents. It filled the training hall and was everywhere. It was as if he had turned into an emperor who suppressed all things. He commanded the great Dao accents to surround the two of them. Danger! Xiao Han sensed a majestic murderous aura rolling toward them from all directions, wanting to crush them. The entire space was filled with Ning Tianxing's emperor will. It was everywhere and there was no way to divert the attack. However, at this moment, Xiao Han's power of rules swept forward. Like a ribbon piercing through space, it wrapped around Ning Tianxing and Qingji Han. Although she couldn't divert the attack, she could change the position of both sides. The power of rules moved forward and penetrated Ning Tianxing's emperor will. The two types of rules collided with each other, creating an ear-piercing sound. Although Ning Tianxing was strong, Xiao Han's bloodline wasn't weak either.